Settle in, get comfortable, and let your mind drift back, far beyond the clatter of today's world. Tonight, we'll wander through the drafty stone halls of a medieval castle, not as royalty, nor as a knight, nor as a noble lady-in-waiting, but as someone whose life was spent by the warmth of the hearth, with the hiss of dripping fat and the rich scent of stews that never quite left the walls. Imagine yourself there, deep within the castle's winding corridors, following the faint glow of firelight until you reach the bustling heart of medieval hospitality. The kitchen. This is the domain of the castle cook. Their days were a slow, steady rhythm of chopping, stirring, roasting, and tasting, a life as monotonous as it was demanding. Tonight, we'll explore the daily life of a castle cook, learn about the feasts they prepared for grand banquets, peek at the hidden secrets of castle food storage and preservation, and glimpse how these humble servants stood both close to, and worlds apart from, the glittering elite they fed. So, let your eyes grow heavy as the castle walls close around you. The fires crackle, knives clink on wooden boards, and the scent of simmering broth drifts through the stone corridors. Let's begin. Segment 1. A day in the life of a castle cook. Imagine the castle long before dawn, its towers silhouetted against a night sky so deep it feels almost endless. Within these thick stone walls, most souls lie curled under rough blankets, breathing softly in the chill. But in the kitchens, a different sort of life is already beginning to stir. You are the castle cook, or perhaps a weary apprentice, rubbing the sleep from your eyes. Your bed is a straw pallet tucked in a small alcove just off the main kitchen hearth, close enough that you can hear the fire sighing and feel the warmth against the creeping cold. It is a small comfort, for life as a castle cook is governed by the hearth, always the hearth. A flickering companion that demands endless tending. The first task, every single morning, is coaxing the embers back to life. You kneel on the flagstones, your knees chilled through your thin wool hose. You cradle the blackened coals gently, blowing with a steady breath until they glow with an orange pulse, like tiny captive suns. Bits of kindling crackle as they catch, the first welcome hiss of flame breaking the hush of the pre-dawn hours. You feed the fire with logs stacked neatly nearby, oak and ash, the preferred woods for a steady, lasting heat. With the fire alive, the true rhythm begins. There is water to fetch, always water. The castle's well lies in the courtyard, a brisk walk through the early cold. You heft the heavy wooden buckets, careful not to spill too much as you navigate the frost-lit cobbles. The water will be used for everything, for boiling pottage, for scrubbing the boards where meat will be chopped, for washing the clay pots blackened by soot and time. Back inside, your breath still curls in pale wisps above the hearth's warmth. The kitchen is no grand hall but a cluster of interconnected spaces, each with its own tasks. The main hearth dominates the room, an open fire with iron hooks and chains from which heavy cauldrons swing. A side bakehouse holds the domed oven for bread, its rounded shape built to trap the heat long after the flames are raked out. Pantries branch off in shadowy nooks, storing sacks of coarse flour, barrels of salt fish, and baskets of onions and root vegetables. A buttery might lie nearby, filled with barrels of ale and small casks of wine. Dough must be kneaded for the day's bread. You plunge your hands into the coarse flour, mixing it with yeast and water, until it clings to itself, sticky at first, then smoother under your persistent folding and pressing. The rhythm of kneading is its own kind of quiet music. Push, fold, turn, until the dough sighs into the shape you demand of it. The dough rests near the hearth, warmth helping it to rise while you turn to other chores. On a rough-hewn table sits yesterday's cured meat, a haunch of venison, perhaps, or a joint of salt pork that must be soaked to draw out the brine before cooking. A pair of scullions, young boys with sleeves too big for their arms, help carry buckets of fresh water and scrub the table with coarse salt and cloths. In one corner, herbs dry in bundled bunches, rosemary, sage, thyme. These humble plants add depth to the castle's simple fare. You crumble a pinch between your fingers, the scent sharp and comforting. A tiny reminder that even in the drafty stone hallways, life can hold small delights. As the castle stirs to life above you, the rhythm quickens. Footsteps echo on the stairs as stewards and pages begin their rounds. One may appear in the kitchen doorway with a list. The dais needs dictated by the lord and lady of the castle. If there is a hunt planned, you'll be preparing game later, dressing rabbits or plucking geese. If a feast looms, the kitchen will swell with noise and heat. A tangle of spit boys turning whole pigs over open flame, the hiss of fat dripping onto coals below. But for now, the day's first meal must be made ready. The castle's morning fare is no lavish banquet. For the household's lower ranks, the stable hands, grooms, maids, and guards, breakfast is a thick, bubbling pot, barley or oats simmered with scraps of meat or bones, flavored with herbs and perhaps a handful of onions or leeks. It is humble, nourishing, and endlessly repetitive. You tend the pot, stirring with a long-handled wooden spoon. The steam rises, damp and earthy, mingling with the smell of smoke and baked bread. There is satisfaction in this constancy. The same stirring motion that your mother or her mother's mother might have done, each swirl connecting you to the generations before. The bread, now risen, is slid into the oven. The oven has been heated by burning bundles of brushwood until its walls glow faintly with stored heat. The ashes are raked out carefully, and the loaves go in rounds for the Lord's table. Coarser black bread for the rest. You mark them with a simple cross, partly for superstition, partly to let steam escape. As the pottage simmers and the bread bakes, there is always more to do. You check on the root vegetables stored in the cool pantry, brush the dirt from carrots and parsnips, inspect the sacks of onions for signs of rot. You must be vigilant. In these times, waste is an enemy. Everything is precious. Every scrap of meat, every crust of bread, every withered root that might lend flavor to the next pot of stew. By now, the castle is fully awake. The smell of baking bread drifts up through stone stairwells, and servants begin to trickle down to the kitchen for their share. You dole out bowls of steaming pottage, watch them cradle the warmth in cold hands, grateful for this simple start to the day. A few muttered thanks, a nod of recognition. Your work is acknowledged, but the castle cook remains just another moving part in the larger machinery of noble life. There is no time to linger. As soon as the last bowl is scraped clean, the washing begins. Pots are scrubbed with sand and hot water, boards wiped down with salt to ward off lingering bacteria you do not know by name but understand well enough to fear. A single slip, a piece of meat gone off, bread baked with bad flour, can bring sickness to the entire household. And when that happens, it is the cook who shoulders the blame. And so, the rhythm continues. Fires fed, water fetched, knives honed on wet. The kitchen never sleeps. When the castle holds a feast, your work doubles, triples. An endless tide of roasting, stewing, baking, boiling. You command your helpers like a small army, each with their place. The spit boys whose arms ache from turning the roasting meats, the scullery maids who wash endless piles of trenchers and knives, the apprentices who dart about with baskets of herbs, pitchers of ale, or trays of pies. Above, the lord and lady dine on rich fare, sweetmeats, roasted swan, spiced wine. Below, you work steadily, the only reward a stolen morsel, perhaps a cup of ale before the hearth, as the castle settles into night once more. And when the last pot is scrubbed, the last embers banked safely, you stretch out on your pallet. The warmth of the hearth soothes your tired bones, and the rhythm of your life settles into dreams. It is the same each day, comforting in its repetition, harsh in its demands, but always yours to command, so long as the fire keeps burning. As the sun climbs higher beyond the castle walls, its warmth rarely penetrates the thick stones of the kitchen. Here, the hearth remains the true sun, its glow casting shadows that dance across blackened beams and soot-streaked walls. Imagine yourself tending to it, every movement deliberate, each small decision guiding the day's meals. You pause to watch the flames curl around the base of a great black cauldron. This pot has simmered thousands of meals, its iron belly seasoned by the hands that have stirred it for generations. The water inside trembles with a soft, constant bubble, a soothing reminder that, for now, the castle's belly will be fed. Nearby, the bakehouse oven stands like a quiet beast, radiating the warmth of the morning's bread baking. You check the loaves, turning them gently, mindful of the hot stone floor beneath. Some loaves are made with fine white flour, a costly luxury milled from the best wheat, ground finely to please the noble palate. These precious loaves are destined for the Lord's high table. Others are dark and dense, mixed with rye, barley, or even dried peas, sturdy enough to fill the bellies of the workers and maids who labor all day within these walls. The bread, once cooled, will be stacked neatly on wooden boards, covered with cloths to keep away the damp. A portion must be set aside for the day's trenchers, the thick slabs that serve as plates for the Lord's household. These trenchers will soak up juices and scraps during the meal, then be gathered and, if not too spoiled, given to the castle's poorest or fed to the hounds. Nothing is wasted. Not in these stone walls where every crumb holds value. The bustle grows as the morning wanes. The scullions scurry about like restless mice. You watch as one, his hair sticking to his forehead in the heat, hauls in a basket of root vegetables just pulled from the kitchen garden. Carrots, parsnips, and wrinkled turnips spill onto the work table, trailing clumps of dark earth. You lift a carrot, brush off the soil with your thumb, and split it with a practiced twist of your knife. Its scent is faintly sweet, promising depth to the midday. You remind the scullions to wash each vegetable carefully. No grit must slip into the cooking pot. Sand between the teeth is an insult to even the simplest meal. A careless cook earns no trust. A good cook knows that trust, once lost, is near impossible to win back. Near the hearth, a spit boy readies the meat for roasting. His arms are thin, but he knows the weight of a roast well. Today, it is a modest joint, a haunch of venison from a successful hunt 2 days past. Salted and hung in the cool pantry to draw out blood and preserve the flesh, it now turns slowly above the coals. Fat drips in steady tears onto the fire, sending up a hiss and a fragrant smoke that lingers in every fold of your woolen tunic. Turning meat on a spit is punishing work for a boy. The handle must be turned steadily, so that the roast cooks evenly, its outer skin browning to a crackling crust, while the inside stays tender. The spit boy's arm aches long before the meat is ready, but he dares not stop. A moment's carelessness can ruin an entire joint, and for that, the master cook, not the boy, will bear the blame. In the corners of the kitchen, herbs hang in small, fragrant bunches. Sage, thyme, rosemary. You pluck a sprig of rosemary, bruising the leaves between your fingers to release their sharp, clean scent. These herbs are precious treasures, grown in the castle garden or foraged from the wild hedgerows beyond the walls. They transform the ordinary, lifting a simple broth into something the Lord might praise, sweetening the air so thick with meat and smoke. Imagine the small pleasures in this life, the warmth of the fire against your chilled hands, the satisfaction of seeing a loaf rise just so, its crust crackling where you scored it with your blade, the rhythm of your knife on the chopping board, a measured cadence that calms the mind. The cook's day is relentless, but within it lie these tiny moments of mastery. Nearby, the bakehouse oven stands like a quiet beast, radiating the warmth of the morning's bread baking. You check the loaves, turning them gently, mindful of the hot stone floor beneath. Some loaves are made with fine white flour, a costly luxury milled from the best wheat, ground finely to please the noble palate. These precious loaves are destined for the Lord's high table. Others are dark and dense, mixed with rye, barley, or even dried peas, sturdy enough to fill the bellies of the workers and maids who labor all day within these walls. The bread, once cooled, will be stacked neatly on wooden boards, covered with cloths to keep away the damp. A portion must be set aside for the day's trenchers, the thick slabs that serve as plates for the Lord's household. These trenchers will soak up juices and scraps during the meal, then be gathered and, if not too spoiled, given to the castle's poorest or fed to the hounds. Nothing is wasted. Not in these stone walls where every crumb holds value. The bustle grows as the morning wanes. The scullions scurry about like restless mice. You watch as one, his hair sticking to his forehead in the heat, hauls in a basket of root vegetables just pulled from the kitchen garden. Carrots, parsnips, and wrinkled turnips spill onto the work table, trailing clumps of dark earth. You lift a carrot, brush off the soil with your thumb, and split it with a practiced twist of your knife. Its scent is faintly sweet, promising depth to the midday. You remind the scullions to wash each vegetable carefully. No grit must slip into the cooking pot. Sand between the teeth is an insult to even the simplest meal. A careless cook earns no trust. A good cook knows that trust, once lost, is near impossible to win back. Near the hearth, a spit boy readies the meat for roasting. His arms are thin, but he knows the weight of a roast well. Today, it is a modest joint, a haunch of venison from a successful hunt 2 days past. Salted and hung in the cool pantry to draw out blood and preserve the flesh, it now turns slowly above the coals. Fat drips in steady tears onto the fire, sending up a hiss and a fragrant smoke that lingers in every fold of your woolen tunic. Turning meat on a spit is punishing work for a boy. The handle must be turned steadily, so that the roast cooks evenly, its outer skin browning to a crackling crust, while the inside stays tender. The spit boy's arm aches long before the meat is ready, but he dares not stop. A moment's carelessness can ruin an entire joint, and for that, the master cook, not the boy, will bear the blame. In the corners of the kitchen, herbs hang in small, fragrant bunches. Sage, thyme, rosemary. You pluck a sprig of rosemary, bruising the leaves between your fingers to release their sharp, clean scent. These herbs are precious treasures, grown in the castle garden or foraged from the wild hedgerows beyond the walls. They transform the ordinary, lifting a simple broth into something the Lord might praise, sweetening the air so thick with meat and smoke. Imagine the small pleasures in this life, the warmth of the fire against your chilled hands, the satisfaction of seeing a loaf rise just so, its crust crackling where you scored it with your blade, the rhythm of your knife on the chopping board, a measured cadence that calms the mind. The cook's day is relentless, but within it lie these tiny moments of mastery. Still, you are ever watchful for misfortune. Rats skitter through the pantry at night if you are careless with crumbs. Molds creep into sacks of grain if dampness sneaks in. A bad cut from your blade can fester, turning a small wound into a mortal threat. And food poisoning, though you do not know the word, is a specter that haunts every cook's restless dreams. A spoiled dish can sicken a household, even bring down a lord. In those moments, suspicion turns first to the kitchen, to you. You glance over to the buttery, where barrels of ale rest in the dim coolness. A trusted apprentice draws a fresh pitcher, its foam spilling over the rim. Ale is safer than water in many cases. The brewing process kills what the well cannot keep out. Everyone drinks it, from the youngest page to the aging steward. You sip a mouthful, the earthy taste washing away the dryness in your throat. It is nearly time for the midday meal. Above your head, the castle echoes with the footsteps of pages carrying messages, stewards taking stock of stores, maids sweeping out chambers. You can sense the whole place breathing around you, a hive of activity, each part dependent on the others. The steward appears at the kitchen threshold, parchment in hand. He nods a curt greeting, his face lined with the weariness of too many seasons spent balancing ledgers and appeasing the lordess' demands. He murmurs today's instructions. The lord will dine with 2 visiting merchants. The meal must be simple, but respectable, enough to show the castle's prosperity without wasteful excess. You nod, absorbing the details. A good cook never needs to write them down. In your mind, you weigh the stores, the venison already turning on the spit, the fresh bread cooling under linen cloth, the onions and leeks ready to slip into a savory pot, perhaps a small tart of dried fruit to finish, a sweetness to close the meal on a gentler note. As the steward retreats, you give instructions to your apprentices in a low, calm voice. Each one knows their role. One ladles broth into sturdy clay bowls, another slices bread into thick wedges, another tests the roast, basting it with its own rendered fat so that each bite will be tender and rich. The smell of the roasting meat mingles with the yeasty scent of fresh bread. The hearth's warmth prickles your cheeks. You wipe your hands on your apron and take a moment to watch, to stand back and see the kitchen hum with quiet purpose. Each clink of ladle against pot, each scrape of knife on board, each hush of boiling water. It is the music of your life, a steady song you have learned by heart. At last, the pages arrive to carry the dishes up to the hall. They balance trays with the precision of acrobats. For a spilled plate means more than an empty belly. It is a stain on the castle's reputation. You watch them go, the food you labored over disappearing into the echoing stairwells, up to the world above, where laughter and chatter will fill the great hall. Here below, the kitchen remains. There is cleaning yet to do, always cleaning. Pots black with soot must be scrubbed with sand and hot water. Knives must be wiped, dried, and set aside lest they rust. The tables are scraped clean of crumbs and scraps, which are gathered for the hounds or the castle's poorest. Waste is a luxury none can afford. When at last the midday meal's chaos quiets, you might lean against the warm hearth, cradling a small bowl of broth for yourself. It is not the rich venison or the delicate fruit tarts served above, but it is nourishing enough to fill the gnawing emptiness in your belly. You savor it slowly, letting the warmth spread through you as you stare into the flames. Outside, the sun has passed its peak, shadows lengthening in the courtyard beyond the thick walls. Soon enough, the work will begin again. The afternoon brings more tasks. Preparing the evening meal, salting and hanging fresh meat to preserve it, storing away what must be saved for the morrow. Yet, for this brief moment, you stand still in the hush. Soot on your hands, warmth in your bones, the kitchen quiet around you. The hearth crackles, the bread cools, and the rhythm of your life holds steady. comforting in its constancy, harsh in its demands, but woven through with small, steady rewards that keep you standing long after the sun sinks below the castle's towers. Stay here a while longer, by the warmth of the hearth. Let your mind drift through the drifting smoke and the scent of roasting meat, and notice the life that gathers around you. Not just the food, but the people who move through these stone-walled chambers day after day. A castle kitchen is not a place for solitude. It is a small, close-knit world of its own, a hidden community, pulsing behind the grandeur of the great hall above. Imagine the shifting cast of figures. The spit boys with their tired arms and smudged cheeks. The scullions barely more than children scrubbing knives and bowls until their fingers chap and crack. The stout women who shape dough with practiced hands and gossip in low voices while they work. There is the master cook, you, the one whose word must be law in this warm, smoky domain. Your eyes see everything. The spoiled sack of flour hidden in the corner, the scraps of bone left for the dogs, the apprentice slipping a piece of meat into his pocket for later. You know how to reward careful hands and how to correct a careless one with a clipped word or a raised brow. It is a hierarchy, not so different from the Lord's court above, except the power here comes not from birth but from the steady weight of knowledge. A cook who keeps a lord's table well fed holds a kind of quiet, enduring influence. The day passes in measured steps. After the midday meal, there is a hush, a brief moment when the kitchen is not bustling with clatter and flame. Some of the younger boys nod off near the warm hearth heads, resting on folded arms. A few stolen moments of sleep, while they can. Others sharpen knives on whetstones, the rhythmic scrape echoing through the stone chamber like a soft drumbeat. In a corner, an old scullery maid stirs a pot of broth that will simmer into the evening. Her hands are knotted with age, but she moves with the slow confidence of someone who has lived decades by the hearth. She hums to herself a tune so old, no one remembers.
Aside, lest they rust. The tables are scraped clean of crumbs and scraps, which are gathered for the hounds or the castle's poorest. Waste is a luxury none can afford. When at last the midday meal's chaos quiets, you might lean against the warm hearth, cradling a small bowl of broth for yourself. It is not the rich venison or the delicate fruit tart served above, but it is nourishing enough to fill the gnawing emptiness in your belly. You savor it slowly, letting the warmth spread through you as you stare into the flames. Outside, you know the sun is past its peak, shadows lengthening in the courtyard beyond the thick walls. Soon enough, the work will begin again. The afternoon brings more tasks, preparing the evening meal, salting and hanging fresh meat to preserve it, storing away what must be saved for the morrow. Yet, for this brief moment, you stand still, in the hush, soot on your hands, warmth in your bones. The kitchen quiet around you. The hearth crackles, the bread cools, and the rhythm of your life holds steady, comforting in its constancy, harsh in its demands, but woven through with small, steady rewards that keep you standing long after the sun sinks below the castle's towers. Stay here a while longer, by the warmth of the hearth. Let your mind drift through the drifting smoke and the scent of roasting meat, and notice the life that gathers around you. Not just the food, but the people who move through these stone-walled chambers day after day. A castle kitchen is not a place for solitude. It is a small, close-knit world of its own, a hidden community pulsing behind the grandeur of the great hall above. Imagine the shifting cast of figures, the spit boys with their tired arms and smudged cheeks. The scullions, barely more than children, scrubbing knives and bowls until their fingers chap and crack. The stout women who shape dough with practiced hands and gossip in low voices while they work. There's the master cook, you, the one whose word must be law in this warm, smoky domain. Your eyes see everything. The spoiled sack of flour hidden in the corner, the scraps of bone left for the dogs, the apprentice slipping a piece of meat into his pocket for later. You know how to reward careful hands and how to correct a careless one with a clipped word or a raised brow. It is a hierarchy, not so different from the Lord's court above, except the power here comes not from birth, but from the steady weight of knowledge. A cook who keeps a lord's table well fed holds a kind of quiet, enduring influence. The day passes in measured steps. After the midday meal, there is a hush, A brief moment when the kitchen is not bustling with clatter and flame. Some of the younger boys nod off near the warm hearth, heads resting on folded arms. A few stolen moments of sleep while they can. Others sharpen knives on whetstones, the rhythmic scrape echoing through the stone chamber like a soft drumbeat. In a corner, an old scullery maid stirs a pot of broth that will simmer into the evening. Her hands are knotted with age, but she moves with the slow confidence of someone who has lived decades by the hearth. She hums to herself a tune so old no one remembers.
Words. Perhaps it is a lullaby she once sang to a baby now grown and working in the fields or fighting in the Lord's levy. A kitchen boy returns from the courtyard carrying fresh herbs, mint, mugjar, and chives. He holds them like treasure, dirt still clinging to the roots. These small handfuls of green bring brightness to the heavy fare, a garnish for the Lord's table, a scent of freshness that breaks through the constant weight of smoke and salt. Sometimes visitors come to the kitchen. A steward to inspect stores a page with a message from the lady of the house, or a chaplain who stops to chat as he passes through on his way to the buttery for a sip of ale. They stand awkwardly, as if the warmth and bustle are foreign to them. The kitchen is its own land, with its own language of clinking pots, chopping knives, and the hiss of boiling water. Outsiders rarely linger long. Among yourselves, the conversation flows in murmurs and low laughter. Someone teases the spit boy for falling asleep at his post yesterday, and he flushes red, promising it won't happen again. Another recounts a rumor overheard from the stable hands, some scandal about the stewardess' cousin caught sneaking out the postern gate at dawn. Gossip drifts like smoke through the castle, curling around corners and up staircases, but here in the kitchen, it mixes with the steam and is forgotten by supper. Yet, beneath the murmurs lies the unspoken truth that all of you share the same fate. You belong to the castle as much as the stones or the banners fluttering from the towers. Your lives are tied to the flame. So long as the Lord's hearth burns, so too does yours. The afternoon drifts onward. You send the younger scullions out to split more firewood, their small axes clinking against the seasoned logs. A pair of older boys lug heavy buckets down to the well for more water. It seems endless, this fetching and carrying, but the castle devours water like it does firewood and food. A moment of quiet comes as you stand near the pantry doorway. The pantry itself is a marvel, its shelves lined with earthen crocks of salted fish, jars of honeycomb, wheels of hard cheese wrapped in cloth. Large sacks hold dried peas and beans. Stacks of smoked bacon hang from ceiling beams to keep them from the rats. Everything is carefully accounted for. A good cook knows exactly how long each store must last. Too lavish a feast, too careless a hand, and you will find yourself facing the Lord's displeasure when the larder runs bare before the next harvest. You test a cheese wheel with your thumb, pressing the rind to feel its firmness. You lift the lid of a crock to check the fish, making sure the salt crust remains intact. You sniff a jar of honey, the sweetness sharp enough to cut through the thick scents of meat and smoke that cling to your nostrils. Even now, you carry in your mind the endless calculations that rule your days. How many mouths to feed tonight? How many slices will a haunch of venison yield? Will the bread from this morning hold until tomorrow? Or must you rise before dawn to need more? The sums hum in the back of your mind like the soft crackle of the hearth.
Above the sun begins its slow descent. The windows of the great hall catch the light and scatter it across the courtyard in gold. Here below, you stir another pot, taste the broth, adjust the salt. You pass a scrap of bread to the youngest scullion, who grins at the rare treat. He tears it into smaller bites, savoring each crumb as if it were a feast. In the next room, you hear the soft rush of wind through the arrow slits. The castle holds the day's warmth close to its chest, but you know that soon the chill will creep back in. You bank the fire with fresh logs, ensuring it will be ready to roar to life when evening calls. The spit boy gives the turning handle a gentle push, checking the roast that will feed the Lord's household at dusk. The hidden community of the kitchen is bound by more than the work. It is bound by small kindnesses. A cup of ale slipped to an exhausted apprentice. A warm corner by the oven offered to an old woman whose joints ache with the cold. It is bound by the understanding that when the storms rage outside and the winds howl through the battle, it is the hearth that holds you together. You do not speak of these things. There is no need. They are simply the way of life. as constant as the rising of the sun and the steady turning of the spit. In this place, the cook is both master and servant, master of the flame, servant to the Lord above. And in this balance, you find your purpose, your place. The fire crackles, the bread cools, the broth simmers. Beyond these walls, banners may rise and fall, lords may come and go, but here the hearth remains. And so do you. Imagine the sky beyond the arrow slits, a canvas of dusky purples and deepening blues as the sun dips behind distant hills. The castle, once alive with voices and footsteps echoing down stone corridors, begins to settle. A hush drapes itself over the battlements, broken only by the clink of armor as the night watch takes its posts along the walls. Down here, in the warm belly of the keep, the kitchen glows with a softer kind of life. The day's demands have been met. Bread has been broken at the Lord's table. The spit boy's aching arms have earned him a scrap of meat. The scullions have scrubbed the last trenches, sweeping away the crumbs that fall to the rush-covered floor. You stay before the hearth, watching the embers pulse like the heartbeat of this hidden world. There is satisfaction in the slow winding down of the day. Not triumph. This is no life for grand victories, but a steady, quiet pride that every belly has been fed, every pot scrubbed clean, every loaf accounted for. Listen closely now, and you can hear the faint lull of a lullaby drifting from one of the scullery maids. She hums to herself as she folds rags and stacks wooden bowls, her voice weaving through the drifting smoke. For a moment, you close your eyes and let that song settle on your shoulders like a blanket. Nearby, the apprentices gather what scraps they can, crusts of bread, a heel of cheese, the thin broth left at the bottom of a pot. Their laughter is soft, but it carries an edge of relief. Another day's survived, another day's work done. They will slip away soon to their straw.
Above, the sun begins its slow descent. The windows of the great hall catch the light and scatter it across the courtyard in gold. Here below, you stir another pot, taste the broth, adjust the salt. You pass a scrap of bread to the younger scullion, who grins at the rare treat. He tears it into smaller bites, savoring each crumb as if it were a feast. In the next room, you hear the soft rush of wind through the arrow slits. The castle holds the day's warmth close to its chest, but you know that soon the chill will creep back in. You bank the fire with fresh logs, ensuring it will be ready to roar to life when evening calls. The spit boy gives the turning handle a gentle push, checking the roast that will feed the Lord's household at dusk. The hidden community of the kitchen is bound by more than the work. It is bound by small kindnesses. A cup of ale slipped to an exhausted apprentice, a warm corner by the oven offered to an old woman whose joints ache with the cold. It is bound by the understanding that when the storms rage outside and the winds howl through the battle, it is the hearth that holds you together. You do not speak of these things. There is no need. They are simply the way of life, as constant as the rising of the sun and the steady turning of the spit. In this place, the cook is both master and servant, master of the flame, servant to the Lord above. And in this balance, you find your purpose, your place. The fire crackles, the bread cools, the broth simmers. Beyond these walls, banners may rise and fall, lords may come and go. But here, the hearth remains, and so do you. Imagine the sky beyond the arrow slits, a canvas of dusky purples and deepening blues. The castle, once alive with voices and footsteps echoing down stone corridors, begins to settle. A hush drapes itself over the battlements, broken only by the clink of armor as the night watch takes its posts along the walls. Down here, in the warm belly of the keep, the kitchen glows with a softer kind of life. The day's demands have been met. Bread has been broken at the Lord's table. The spit boy's aching arms have earned him a scrap of meat. The scullions have scrubbed the last trenches, sweeping away the crumbs that fall to the rush-covered floor. You stand before the hearth, watching the embers pulse like the heartbeat of this hidden world. There is satisfaction in the slow winding down of the day, not triumph. This is no life for grand victories, but a steady, quiet pride that every belly has been fed, every pot scrubbed clean, every loaf accounted for. Listen closely now, and you can hear the faint lull of a lullaby drifting from one of the scullery maids. She hums to herself as she folds rags and stacks wooden bowls, her voice weaving through the drifting smoke. For a moment, you close your eyes and let that song settle on your shoulders like a blanket. Nearby, the apprentices gather what scraps they can. Crusts of bread, a heel of cheese, the thin broth left at the bottom of a pot. Their laughter is soft, but it carries an edge of relief. Another day survived, another day's work done. They will slip away soon to their straw pallets in alcoves, or to the shadowed corners of storerooms, grateful for the warmth the hearth leaves behind. You take your seat on a low stool near the fire. Your legs feel heavy, your palms rough from hours of stirring, chopping, hauling, washing. You rub a smudge of soot from your cheek with the back of your hand, leaving behind a streak of clean skin that soon enough will be marked again by tomorrow's tasks. Your thoughts drift to the day, a small moments. The crackle of bread crust breaking under your blade, the sharp bite of fresh rosemary between your fingers, the comforting weight of the ladle's stirring broth that you know by scent alone has turned just right. In these tiny certainties, your world is shaped and made bearable. One by one, the helpers slip away. The spitboy curls near the ashes, seeking the last wisps of warmth. The scullions shuffle off, their chatter trailing away like a stream trickling through the dark. You sit a moment longer, alone now with the crackling coals. You listen to the hush beyond the heavy wooden door. The castle breathing in sleep, its stone walls holding the warmth you and your small band have tended all day long. You think of the stores waiting in the pantry. You know which wheels of cheese need turning, which casks of ale must be tapped tomorrow, which sacks of grain sit dangerously low. Always, the tally hums in your head, a melody you never fully set down, not even when you close your eyes at night. Above you, the lord and lady rest in their richly adorned chambers, wrapped in furs and heavy blankets. Their dreams drift through silken hangings and cushioned beds. They do not know the shape of the hearth's flicker, or the way smoke finds the cracks in the ceiling beams. They do not taste the broth as it simmers, or worry whether the fire might falter while they sleep. You and the small circle who call this smoky place their own. In the kitchen, the world is smaller, simpler, bound by the turning of a spit, the rising of dough, the slow seep of heat through the stones. Here, time moves not by the clock but by the hush of embers, the swell of the hearth, the gentle weight of a hand stirring the pot. At last, you rise, your bones stiff. You bank the fire, shoveling ash over glowing coals so they will smolder until dawn. A careful cook never lets the fire die. Tomorrow's bread depends on these hidden embers, warm and waiting. You wipe your hands on your apron one last time, hang your ladle on its peg, and slip through the door into the narrow passageway that leads to your pallet. Outside the kitchen, the night air bites at your skin. Somewhere in the distance, an owl calls from the castle's rafters. You pause, listening to its lonely question echo through the dark. Then you step inside your small chamber, a low room tucked just off the kitchen. No bed of silks, no feather pillows, just a straw mattress, the faint glow of firelight seeping under the door. You stretch out slowly, your muscles aching but warm, the day's rhythms still humming behind your eyes. The scullions breathe softly in the next room. The spitboy murmurs in his sleep, his dreams no doubt spun with endless turning handles and the hiss of fat on coals. The castle sleeps, and so, at last, do you. In this flickering circle of warmth and labor, you have found your place. Keeper of the hearth, steward of the stores, silent guardian of the flame that feeds the great house above. As you drift into dreams, the embers glow softly behind the hearth door, promising that tomorrow, like today, the rhythm will begin again. And in that steady, timeless pattern, you find your rest. Segment 2. Preparing for a feast. Emerge in the castle when word of a feast first stirs the air, a ripple that moves through the silent stone corridors, carried by pages and whispered by stewards. A feast means more than food. It is a performance, a sign of power and plenty, an opportunity to remind the world that within these walls, the Lord's table groans under abundance, no matter the hardships beyond. For you, the castle cook, news of a feast brings an ache in the bones before the first onion is peeled. It means long hours by the hearth, sleeves rolled back, fingers raw from the cold and the knife's steady work. It means the quiet daily rhythm is replaced with a crackling intensity, each moment bound to the expectation of excellence. Picture the steward standing at your side, a parchment unfurled in his ink-stained hands. He rattles off the list in a voice clipped and precise. So many swans to be roasted, so many pies to be made, so many trenchers of bread to be baked, all while the everyday meals for the household continue unwavering and constant. Your mind hums with the tally before the steward even finishes. The stores must be checked. Barrels of salted fish, stacks of smoked meat, sacks of flour and dried peas. The root cellar must yield its last carrots and onions, carefully chosen to be fresh enough to hold up under the cook's knife. The castle's poultry yard may be scoured for geese, ducks, hens. Each bird, another thread in the tapestry of the meal to come. Imagine yourself standing at the pantry door as you take stock. You run a careful hand over a wheel of hard cheese, knock gently on the side of a cask of ale to test its soundness, pinch a handful, of course, salt to be sure. It hasn't drawn too much damp from the air. One slip, one moldy sack, overlooked, and the illusion of plenty could sour in an instant. Soon enough, the kitchen is transformed. Where once the hearth's heat held a quiet pulse, now the air shimmers with motion and noise. The spit boys are doubled in number, their hands blistered but steady as they shoulder the handles that keep the roasts turning. The scullions scurry like ants, knives clutch tight as they chop, peel, and scrape, all beneath your watchful eye. At the great hearth iron cauldrons bubble with fragrant broths. Nearby, small tarts are shaped by quick fingers, filled with spiced fruit or minced meats, and tucked carefully into the oven's mouth. Scent and smoke cling to every corner. The sharpness of garlic and onion, the sweetness of fruit preserves, the dark, rich aroma of meat searing above the coals. Outside the kitchen, the castle buzzes with the same anticipation. Minstrels tune their instruments in the echoing halls. Pages polish the trestle tables, ready to be set up in the great hall. Servants drape cloths of linen over rough boards, smooth out the creases with care. Candles, precious and hand-dipped, are counted and set in holders to scatter their flickering glow across the high stone walls when darkness falls. But here, beneath it all, the heart of the feast beats in your kitchen. Each ingredient carries its own story. Take the swan, not simply caught but marked with the lordess crest on its bill to show all who dine that this bird was born and bred on his land. Plucked and cleaned, its feathers are set aside. For once roast, the bird will be dressed again in its plumage, a show of opulence as much as flavor. You check the pastry dough for the pies, rolling it out on the broad table, the flour dusting the air like a soft snowfall. Meat pies are a mainstay, their fillings rich with spices that whisper of distant lands. Pepper, cinnamon, a hint of nut. These are costly treasures brought by traders who braved storms and rough seas to reach English shores. To serve such flavors is to declare that your lord's reach extends far beyond these castle walls. As you work, you instruct your apprentices with quiet authority. One misstep could waste precious ingredients. An undercooked bird, a pie with a soggy bottom, a broth oversalted by an inexperienced hand. You correct with a nod or a sharp tap of the spoon on the table, reminding them that in this small kingdom of the kitchen, precision is survival. There is little rest during the days that lead up to a feast. Sleep comes in snatches, a half-hour doze by the banked hearth, while the spit boys keep their vigil, a crust of bread and a cup of ale taken standing, your eyes never drifting far from the bubbling pots. The castle cook becomes a sentinel, guarding not just the food but the delicate balance between expectation and disaster. Listen to the soundscape that fills the air. The steady thud of a cleaver against a joint of beef, the scrape of iron hooks as fresh game is hung to bleed, the hiss of fat dropping into fire, the quiet hum of voices exchanging instructions in the glow of the hearth. Outside, the weather may batter the walls with rain or wind. Within, your realm holds steady. The heat of the ovens, the shine of oil brushed across roasting fowl, the cold of the pantry's stone floor under your worn boots. These are your constants, your markers in a world that spins beyond your control. Sometimes, as you bend over a pot to taste the stew, you might catch the faint music drifting down from the great hall, where minstrels practice their strings and pipes. It reminds you that the work you do here is not just to fill bellies but to sustain spectacle. Each dish is a note in a larger song, a song that tells guests that this castle is safe, bountiful, strong. Yet in your mind, you know the truth. How close the line lies between plenty and want. One cask of spoiled wine, and all the candles and banners in the world cannot mask an empty table. So you work on, sleeves dusted with flour, hands nicked by the slip of the knife. You stir the broth, taste, adjust. You test the pie crust, tapping its golden lid with the back of your spoon. You trust your nose to tell you when the roast has reached that perfect turning point. when the skin is crisp, the juices clear. And all the while, you watch your helpers. The spit boy who turns too slowly and must be reminded with a sharp word. The apprentice who has a clever hand with pastry, but lets the herbs wilt too long in the basket. Each of them a reflection of your craft and your responsibility. As evening deepens on the eve of the feast, the final preparations take on a hush of reverence. The tables in the great hall stand ready, linen spread smooth, pewter plates stacked in careful rows. The candles are lit one by one, their glow flickering against the high arches and tapestries. In the kitchen, the last roasts are lifted from their spits, juices pooled and caught for gravies. The pies are stacked in baskets, their scents mingling sweet and savory. Trenchers are cut and laid out, ready to carry meats, stews, and sauces that will stain their crusts with 100 flavors. The castle above is poised, waiting for the trumpet's call that will summon lord and guest to table. And here below, you stand at the center of it all. Sleeves rolled, apron soiled, hands steady on the ladle that stirs the last pot. The feast is not yet begun, but in your mind you see every course. The roasted birds refeathered for display. The pies cracked open to reveal steaming meat within. The trenchers passed down the trestle tables soaked with wine and laughter. This is your work, your invisible art. Tomorrow, when the hall fills with clinking cups and the minstrels play, you will remain by the hearth, listening for the faint echoes of praise that filter down the stairwell. You will taste none of the glory, but you will feel it in your bones. The quiet satisfaction of knowing that each mouthful, each bite, each whispered compliment began here in the warmth and shadow of the castle's heart. Imagine the castle on the evening of the feast, its towers lit from within by hundreds of candles that cast a golden glow on the grey stone. Outside, the world settles into darkness, but here, the great hall hums like a beehive just before the swarm. You, the castle cook, stand at the edge of this hush and clamor, the unseen conductor of the performance about to unfold. Upstairs, guests arrive in a slow, rustling procession. Cloaks are removed and boots knocked clean of mud. The sharp scent of damp wool and tanned leather mingles with the sweetness of rushes freshly strewn on the floor. Servants greet noblemen and merchants alike, offering wine to soften the chill clinging to their shoulders. You, meanwhile, remain below, your realm the heat and shadow of the kitchen. The hall is dressed for the occasion. Banners bearing the Lord's crest hang from beams that disappear into darkness high above. The tables stretch in long, unbroken lines, covered in linen finer than any cloth the kitchen staff will ever touch. Pewter platters gleam beside goblets of heavy glass, and between all these trappings flicker the candles, tiny constellations that turn the hall into something otherworldly, a place where hunger meets spectacle. Below, in the kitchen's heart, the final moments before the feast are thick with tension. The spit boys' faces are flushed with the heat of the fire. One carefully removes a great haunch of beef, balancing its dripping weight on a wooden board. An apprentice slices it, each cut precise and quick. Fat crackles on the coals as scraps drop away, adding a last burst of fragrance to the air that clings to every inch of your tunic. The pies, golden and fragrant, sit, cooling on shelves, lined with coarse cloth. You run a careful finger around the crust of one, checking its firmness. It must hold its shape when cut, revealing the spiced filling within. The work of hours wrapped into one neat circle. Nearby, trenchers are stacked and waiting. Thick slabs of coarse bread that will soak up rich juices and bear the marks of the feast long after the guests have pushed back their chairs. Pages arrive in clusters, their voices low and urgent. They carry trays and boards piled high, balancing them on small, practiced shoulders. You watch as they lift a swan, roasted to golden perfection. Feathers reattached so it seems to float above the silver platter. Another boy tucks roasted apples around a suckling pig, its skin crisp to a deep, burnished brown. Everything is done with care, not just for taste but for show. The feast is a language the Lord speaks to his guests. See how well my people eat. See what my lands provide. See the reach of my purse in spices and wine and game from forest and river alike. You send the pages off with a quiet word and a nod, watching the procession of dishes wind its way up the narrow stone stair. You imagine the swell of gasps as platters arrive, the low hum of approval as knives cut into flaky pastry and spoons dip into steaming stews. But you do not go up to witness it. The cook's place is here, near the fire. In the great hall, the feast unfolds like a story in many courses. First come trenchers, piled with slices of bread and fresh butter, wheels of cheese sliced into wedges, and bowls of pottage thick with barley and tender bits of rabbit. Next arrive the birds, geese, ducks, chickens, all roasted over the course of the long afternoon. Their skins glisten in the candlelight, and the scent of crisped herbs drifts up to the rafters. Minstrels weave their songs through the clink of goblets and the soft hush of conversation. The Lord raises his cup, offering a toast that echoes off the stone walls. Laughter follows, warm and easy. You, below, can almost hear it through the floor, like distant rain pattering on the roof. Yet in your mind, you know the truth. How close the line lies between plenty and want. One cask of spoiled wine, and all the candles and banners in the world cannot mask an empty table. So you work on, sleeves dusted with flour, hands nicked by the slip of the knife. You stir the broth, taste, adjust. You test the pie crust, tapping its golden lid with the back of your spoon. You trust your nose to tell you when the roast has reached that perfect turning point, when the skin is crisp, the juices clear. And all the while, you watch your helpers, the spit boy who turns too slowly and must be reminded with a sharp word, the apprentice who has a clever hand with pastry, but lets the herbs wilt too long in the basket. Each of them a reflection of your craft and your responsibility. As evening deepens on the eve of the feast, the final preparations take on a hush of reverence. The tables in the great hall stand ready, linen spread smooth, pewter plates stacked in careful rows. The candles are lit one by one, their glow flickering against the high arches and tapestries. In the kitchen, the last roasts are lifted from their spits, juices pooled and caught for gravies. The pies are stacked in baskets, their scents mingling sweet and savory. Trenchers are cut and laid out, ready to carry meats, stews, and sauces that will stain their crusts with 100 flavors. The castle above is poised, waiting for the trumpet's call that will summon lord and guest to table. And here below, you stand at the center of it all. Sleeves rolled, apron soiled, hands steady on the ladle that stirs the last pot. The feast is not yet begun, but in your mind you see every course. The roasted birds refeathered for display. The pies cracked open to reveal steaming meat within. The trenchers passed down the trestle tables soaked with wine and laughter. This is your work, your invisible art. Tomorrow, when the hall fills with clinking cups and the minstrels play, you will remain by the hearth, listening for the faint echoes of praise that filter down the stairwell. You will taste none of the glory, but you will feel it in your bones. The quiet satisfaction of knowing that each mouthful, each bite, each whispered compliment began here in the warmth and shadow of the castle's heart. Imagine the castle on the evening of the feast, its towers lit from within by hundreds of candles that cast a golden glow on the grey stone. Outside, the world settles into darkness, but here, the great hall hums like a beehive just before the swarm. You, the castle cook, stand at the edge of this hush and clamor, the unseen conductor of the performance about to unfold. Upstairs, guests arrive in a slow, rustling procession. Cloaks are removed and boots knocked clean of mud. The sharp scent of damp wool and tanned leather mingles with the sweetness of rushes freshly strewn on the floor. Servants greet noblemen and merchants alike, offering wine to soften the chill clinging to their shoulders. You, meanwhile, remain below, your realm the heat and shadow of the kitchen. The hall is dressed for the occasion. Banners bearing the Lord's crest hang from beams that disappear into darkness high above. The tables stretch in long, unbroken lines, covered in linen finer than any cloth the kitchen staff will ever touch. Pewter platters gleam beside goblets of heavy glass, and between all these trappings flicker the candles, tiny constellations that turn the hall into something otherworldly, a place where hunger meets spectacle. Below, in the kitchen's heart, the final moments before the feast are thick with tension. The spit boys' faces are flushed with the heat of the fire. One carefully removes a great haunch of beef, balancing its dripping weight on a wooden board. An apprentice slices it, each cut precise and quick. Fat crackles on the coals as scraps drop away, adding a last burst of fragrance to the air that clings to every inch of your tunic. The pies, golden and fragrant, sit, cooling on shelves, lined with coarse cloth. You run a careful finger around the crust of one, checking its firmness. It must hold its shape when cut, revealing the spiced filling within. The work of hours wrapped into one neat circle. Nearby, trenchers are stacked and waiting. Thick slabs of coarse bread that will soak up rich juices and bear the marks of the feast long after the guests have pushed back their chairs. Pages arrive in clusters, their voices low and urgent. They carry trays and boards piled high, balancing them on small, practiced shoulders. You watch as they lift a swan, roasted to golden perfection. Feathers reattached so it seems to float above the silver platter. Another boy tucks roasted apples around a suckling pig, its skin crisp to a deep, burnished brown. Everything is done with care, not just for taste but for show. The feast is a language. The Lord speaks to his guests. See how well my people eat. See what my lands provide. See the reach of my purse in spices and wine and game from forest and river alike. You send the pages off with a quiet word and a nod, watching the procession of dishes wind its way up the narrow stone stair. You imagine the swell of gasps as platters arrive, the low hum of approval as knives cut into flaky pastry and spoons dip into steaming stews. But you do not go up to witness it. The cook's place is here, near the fire. In the great hall, the feast unfolds like a story in many courses. First come trenchers, piled with slices of bread and fresh butter, wheels of cheese sliced into wedges, and bowls of pottage thick with barley and tender bits of rabbit. Next arrive the birds, geese, ducks, chickens, all roasted over the course of the long afternoon. Their skins glisten in the candlelight, and the scent of crisped herbs drifts up to the rafters. Minstrels weave their songs through the clink of goblets and the soft hush of conversation. The Lord raises his cup, offering a toast that echoes off the stone walls. Laughter follows, warm and easy. You, below, can almost hear it through the floor, like distant rain pattering on the roof. Between courses, the pages return to you, their trays now piled with bones stripped clean, crusts half-eaten, bowls empty. But for the last streaks of sauce, you'll collect what remains that can be salvaged. A bone for the dogs, a crust that'll dry into crumbs for tomorrow's bread. Waste is a luxury that even a lavish household cannot afford. You give the pages new trays, newly laden, sending them off again into the swirl of the hall above. You picture the guests as they lean back, dabbing lips with linen cloths. They marvel over the spiced pies, the honeyed fruits that glisten like jewels. Perhaps they whisper praise of the food, not for you, but for the Lord who has provided it. You are invisible in this arrangement, yet your mark is everywhere. In each fragrant slice, each perfectly balanced broth, each trench's soggy remnant. In the quiet moments between the rush, you rest your back against the cool stones near the pantry door. The fire warms your shins, but your shoulders ache with the chill of the draft that creeps through every seam of the kitchen. An apprentice brings you a small cup of ale. You sip it slowly, listening to the low chatter of your helpers. They, too, steal these brief moments of rest, leaning on broom handles, resting feet swollen from hours of standing. Soon enough, the next course demands your hands. Small, sweet pastries are laid out on boards, delicate things filled with dried fruits and nuts, brushed with honey that catches the flicker of the hearth light. A fresh batch of cheese is sliced and arranged. You pluck a mint leaf, rub it between your fingers, and lay it atop the final dish. A small, quiet flourish that no one will see but you. The last of the pages are sent away, shoulders stooped under the weight of dishes yet to delight the hall. The noise upstairs swells, then drifts back to you in the slow waves of song and laughter that mark a feast going well. Here, the kitchen feels oddly empty for a moment. The spit boys stand by the cold metal rods, washing fat from their arms. The schoolians stack used bowls, scraping the scraps into wooden buckets that will go to the kennels or the poor at the gates come dawn. The hearth, so fierce all day, settles into a low, comforting crackle. The embers flicker and pulse, small stars in the belly of the stones. You stand at the threshold of your realm and close your eyes for a breath. The feast is not yet done, but the heart of it is behind you now. The greatest dangers, the undercooked meat, the spoiled cask, the dropped pie, had been kept at bay for another night. Above, the minstrels play on, their melodies drifting through cracks and corridors like threads of silk. In this pause, you allow yourself a small thought, that tomorrow, the guests will speak of the swan with its feathers rejoined, the pie with its perfumed filling, the sweet tart that lingered on their tongues. They will remember it as the Lord's triumph, and so it is, but you will remember it as yours too, in the quiet language of the kitchen, the clatter of knives, the hush of coals, the warm press of dough beneath your palms, and, in that quiet satisfaction, you find your strength to lift the ladle again, to call the apprentices back to task, to ready the hearth for the last simmering pot before dawn. For while the feast sparkles above, down here the rhythm never truly ends. The feast above may be a single night's triumph for the Lord and his honored guests, but for you, the cook, its ripples reach far beyond the last clink of goblets. Imagine it now. The great hall growing quieter, voices slipping into murmurs as bellies fill and heads grow heavy with wine. The minstrel's last notes drift up to the rafters, and the candlelight flickers low, pools of wax spreading like tiny lakes across the polished boards. In the kitchen, though, the work lingers like smoke that clings to the stones long after the fire burns down. The spit boys, exhausted from the day's endless turning, slump against the hearth, faces flushed and sleeves stiff with fat and ash. The scullions pick through the buckets of scraps, separating bones for the hounds, gathering the last bits of bread that might yet feed someone tomorrow. You stand in the center of this muted bustle, sleeves rolled back, fingers raw from a day of endless cutting, stirring, and tasting. The air smells of everything the feast once was. Roasted meat, sweet pastry, the faint tang of wine and herbs. But beneath it all lies the deeper scent of spent fires and cold stone, a reminder that even the grandest meal melts away into memory. One by one, the pages return from the hall, shoulders stooped under the weight of used trenchers stacked like coins. The bread is soft and soaked through with juices and gravy. Some pieces are torn to crumbs, others nearly untouched. You check each pile, sorting what might be dried into crusts for ale soup or given to the poor at the gates when dawn breaks. The scullery is a world within a world, small, dark, thick with steam, and the low splash of water against metal and wood. Here, the youngest boys work, sleeves rolled past their elbows as they scrub trenchers, plates, and knives in water that quickly turns gray with grease. Sand and rushes scrape the worst away, the grainy hiss blending with a soft drip of water into pails. You pass among them, offering a word here, a nod there, a gentle correction to the boy scrubbing a pewter cup too roughly. Too much force will leave scratches that catch grease next time. A reminder to tip the water and fetch fresh buckets from the well before the filth grows foul. There is no glamour here, no glow of candlelight nor hush of admiration. But in this quiet hour, there is a kind of closeness. The cooks and scullions, spit boys and maids, gathered by the hearth or bent over wash basins, they carry one another through the drudgery, through the endless noise of work, the back-breaking monotony that follows the swirl of celebration. Outside the kitchen door, the castle has grown still. Beyond the thick wooden planks, the courtyard lies cloaked in night, the wind rustling through the bare branches of the orchard or carrying the distant howl of a dog left to guard the outer gate. But here inside, the hearth still burns low, banked carefully, so that its coals will be ready to spark tomorrow. This first fire, its glow pools on the floor in patches of soft, flickering gold, catching on copper pots and the sheen of the knives. You will soon hang back in their places. Your mind drifts to the stores waiting in the pantry. The feast, grand though it was, has left its mark. Barrels that once brimmed with salted fish now stand half. The last of the early winter carrots have been used up. A fresh cask of ale tapped to keep the guests' goblets full. You hold these numbers in your head, a living ledger that hums alongside the crackle of the coals. You know what must be ordered, bartered for, or gathered before the next round of guests arrives. You step into the pantry for a moment, the chill striking your flushed skin like a wet cloth. Shelves line the walls, shadowed but familiar. You could find the cheese or the honey or the smoked eels blindfolded, if you had to. You run a hand over a sack of flour, judging its weight by feel alone. You listen for the subtle clink of the ale cask's bands, testing the wood for signs of leaks. These small tasks, unnoticed by the Lord's household, keep the castle fed as surely as the grandest roast. Returning to the kitchen, you find the spit boys dozing by the dying fire, heads tucked onto crossed arms. You let them sleep. They have earned these few hours of dreamless rest before dawn comes to shake them awake once more. The scullions, their hands pink and raw, stack the last clean bowls and hang damp cloths to dry on pegs above the hearth. One of them hums a tune, a scrap of a song his mother likely sang to him in the fields or the tiny cottage they left behind when they came to work within these walls. You dip a ladle into the last pot on the hearth, a thin broth made from the bones and scraps of the feast. It is not the rich dish served in the hall, but it is warm and filling. You sip it slowly, letting the salt and warmth loosen the tight knot that has settled between your shoulders. This is your share of the feast. The quiet you swallow when the candles are stubs and the guests sleep off their indulgence under heavy furs. Sometimes, you allow your mind to wander beyond these stone walls, to the fields where sheep graze under the moonlight, to the orchard, now bare and brittle with frost, to the rivers and forests that feed your larder. Each place, each season, drifts through your thoughts, a reminder that the feast did not begin in the kitchen alone, but in the long months of planting, hunting, preserving. Your craft is only the final stitch in a long, invisible tapestry. At last, the kitchen settles into silence. The scullions slip away to their straw pallets, their heads already drooping. The spit boys, who will rise first to fetch wood for the morning's fire, snore softly by the hearth. You stand alone in the warm hush, the air thick with the mingled scent of meat, herbs, smoke, and ash. You banked the fire one last time, raking the embers carefully, spreading them into a soft, glowing bed. A good cook never lets the coals die completely. They are the heartbeat that will rouse the kitchen come dawn. You wipe your hands on your apron, your palms rough, knuckles sore, but your mind quietly satisfied. When you step into the narrow passage that leads to your small chamber, the stones under your feet are cool, and the air holds a damp chill that bites through your wool tunic. You pause at the door, listening. Somewhere deep in the castle, the wind slips through cracks in the battlements, whispering secrets older than the stones themselves. You lie down on your pallet, straw poking through the thin blanket. You pull it close around your shoulders, letting the warmth seep in. The kitchen sounds linger in your mind. The hush of water, the scrape of knives, the sigh of the hearth. They settle into a steady rhythm that hums beneath your drifting thoughts. Above you, in the great hall, now dark and quiet, the echoes of laughter and clinking goblets fade into memory. But here, in the warm, smoky belly of the castle, your work lives on, waiting for the sun's first light to summon you back to the chopping board and the crackling fire. You breathe in the faint smell of the embers banked behind the kitchen door, your constant, your companion, your charge. And, as sleep takes you, you dream not of grand feasts or noble praise, but of the soft, steady rhythm of the hearth that holds your world together, one meal, one bowl, one loaf at a time. Picture the castle in the deep hush after the last guest has slipped away from the long trestle tables, the flickering candles guttering out one by one. Above, the great hall rests beneath its high beams, its rushes now littered with crumbs, stray bones, and wine stains that will be swept up at dawn. The echoes of music still cling to the walls, but they soften with each hour, dissolving like mist in the morning sun. Here in the kitchen, the hush feels earned. The final pots have been scrubbed, their iron bellies warm from the last wash of water and sand. The spit boys, finally released from their post, curl on the warm stones near the banked hearth, their breaths rising in quiet clouds that catch the last gleam of embers. You, the castle cook, stand with your back to the glowing coals, the warmth pressing gently through the thin fabric of your worn tunic. There is a kind of memory that lives in the aftermath. Not the memory the Lord's guest will carry away full of grand stories about golden swans and sugared fruits, but the memory etched into your fingers, your aching shoulders, your boots crusted with flour and soot. You remember the careful turn of the spit that kept the meat just shy of burning, the snap of pastry that told you the pie was baked through, the quick hush you spoke to the apprentices when nerves frayed under the pressure of the steward's demands. Such small moments are the hidden measure of a feast's success. When the guests toast to the Lord's hospitality, they toast also, though they never think it, to the steady eyes of the cook who guarded each dish from mistake, from spoilage, from the small failures that can sour the grandest show. In the glow of the low coals, you reach for a small wooden box, tucked into a nook near the hearth. Inside rest the most precious things you keep, not jewels or coin but seeds, dill, parsley, mustard, and a few rare poppy seeds saved from the castle's garden. These tiny grains hold next season's flavor. You roll them between your fingers, feeling the promise of tomorrow's broth, tomorrow's bread. Even in the height of feasting, you think always of what must come next. Beyond the kitchen door, the courtyard lies wrapped in a silver hush. Moonlight pools in the ruts worn by carts and boots. Somewhere in the distance, a lone guard stamps his feet against the cold. The world feels suspended, the castle's stones holding tight to the warmth and the ghosts of laughter that drift away on the breeze. One by one, the last helpers slip away to their pallets tucked into corners of the scullery or the narrow alcoves off the pantry. The youngest scullion pauses at your side, his eyes drooping with exhaustion. You ruffle his hair a small, wordless kindness, and he ducks away, feet shuffling across the rushes as he disappears into the shadows. You are alone now, but not lonely. The kitchen is never quite empty. Its stones hum with the slow breath of the hearth, the low creak of timber beams that shift as the warmth fades. The ladles hang neatly on their pegs. The knives rest, blades gleaming dully in the dim light. Everything waits, as you wait, for the next dawn, when it will all begin again. There is a lesson here, one you carry like an ember banked in the ashes. That splendor is fleeting, but the labor that makes it is endless. A feast, for all its noise and candlelight, is just a heartbeat in the life of a cook. The real work lives in the hours before and the hours after. The gathering, the tallying of stores, the quiet reckoning with what is gone and what must be found. You lean your shoulder against the cool stone of the pantry art. Your eyes drift shut for a moment, lids heavy as iron pots. You see the Lord in his fine robes, raising a cup to the whole. You see the platters carried on the bent backs of pages. You see the first spark that caught the hearth fire that morning. The same coals that glow at your feet now. Hours later, soft and steady. This is your realm. The hush beneath the roar, the warmth behind the door, the promise that when the world above feasts and fades, the kitchen remains. Bread will rise, stews will bubble, the hearth will crackle. Its quiet tune, long after the last guest stumbles to his chamber. At last, you push yourself from the wall and bank the fire one final time. A gentle scatter of ash, a careful nudge to the logs, a soft puff of breath to test the glow. Satisfied, you hang your apron on its hook, wipe your palms on your sleeves, and step away from the light. Your small pallet waits in the crook of the passage, the straw rustling softly as you sink down. The stones at your back are cold, but the warmth from the hearth seeps through the walls, a faint heartbeat that hums you toward sleep. Outside, the wind brushes past the tower windows, singing its quiet songs through the arrow slits. You listen as you drift to the last pop of an ember, the muffled breathing of the boys near the hearth, the gentle creak of the pantry door settling in its hinges, or reminders that tomorrow, when the castle's banners stir in the dawn breeze, you will rise again. Hands to flour, knife to board, eyes sharp to every detail. Another meal, another day, another feast waiting just beyond the hush. And within it all, your place, constant and unseen, yet holding up the walls more surely than stone or mortar. Segment 3. The Secret Life of the Castle. Story. Imogen descending the worn stone steps behind the kitchen, your footsteps echoing in the narrow passageway where the air grows cooler with each step. The heavy door creaks open on iron hinges, releasing a faint breath of earth and stone, salt and smoke, the scent of secrets kept from sunlight and idle eyes. This is the larder, the pantry, the buttery, the cellar, the hidden belly of the castle where food sleeps and waits. No matter how grand a feast or how humble the meal, all nourishment begins here, where the world above is traded for barrels and sacks, hooks and shelves. The hearth may be the heart of the kitchen, but these cool, shadowed spaces are its bones. The strong, silent structure that holds hunger at bay through lean months and long winters. Step inside. Let your eyes adjust to the hush. You see the faint glint of light flicker off rows of casks and crocks lined up like patient sentinels. Earthen jars squat on low shelves, their wax, seals tight to guard pickled vegetables, brined fish, salted cuts of pork. In the far corner, bundles of herbs hang from the beams, dry and brittle, their scents mixing with the faint temps of mildew that creeps along the damp stones. You run your hand along a hanging side of bacon, its rind rough under your fingertips. A few fat hams, each marked with a cut to show when they were salted and hung, swayed gently from hooks driven deep into the beams above. You tap one with your knuckle, a low, dense sound that tells you it is curing well, the salt working, its slow magic, pulling away the thread of rot. Beyond the meat hooks, barrels huddled together in dim alcoves. You lift the lid of one to see salted herring bobbing in brine, their silver skins dulled by weeks spent steeped in salt and spice. Another barrel holds eels caught from the castle moat and the nearby rivers, smoked dark and coiled like sleepy serpents. Each one is another promise. A meal that can be called upon when the land lies bare under frost. You pass your lantern over the sacks, stacked neatly against the wall. Rye, barley, oats. The grains are dry, but even so, you check for signs of weevils or damp. The smallest intrusion can grow into ruin. A barrel of spoiled flour, a cask of ale turned sour, a crop of root vegetables left to soften and rot in the dark. Here, vigilance is as important as any recipe you keep tucked in your mind. There is an order to this place. a language you have learned to speak in quiet hours when the rest of the household sleeps above. The cheese wheels must be turned every few days, their cloth wrappings checked for mold. The jars of honey are sealed tight, the golden sweetness inside safe from the mice that sometimes slip in through cracks and crevices. At the far end, a stone shelf holds jars of dried peas, lentils, beans, small, hardy foods that make up the backbone of many a winter stew. You run your thumb through a scoop of peas, their smooth shapes clicking softly as they fall back into the jar. They may not stir a nobleman's praise the way roasted swans do, but they feed the castle as surely as the grandest feast. In the buttery, casks of ale line the walls, in neat rows, their wooden staves, bound by iron hoops, that creak softly when the weather shifts. The ale is precious, safer than water from the well. Its brewing kills the small dangers that might lurk, unseen. You test the casks with a gentle rap, listening for the hollow knock that tells you how much remains within. If the levels dip too low too soon, the steward must know, lest the castle run dry before the next brew is ready. Imagine the seasons passing here. Springer's first greens brought in baskets to pickle before they wilt. Summer's berries boiled into jams, sealed with wax and hope. Autumn's hunt-yielding game that must be dressed, salted, hung. Even the cold months have their gifts. Ice cut from the frozen moat, packed into straw-lined pits to keep meat cool deep into the thaw. These spaces are more than mere storage. They are the cook's hedge against misfortune, the quiet hedge that stands between the hearth's warmth and the hunger that waits on the far side of the castle gates. A harsh winter can empty shelves with alarming speed. A failed harvest means the rationing begins early, each morsel counted and weighed in the balance. It is here that your skill is tested as surely as by the fire's flame. You must know what to use and when. When to open a new barrel, when to stretch the dried peas. One more day when to risk the last wheel of cheese to make a meal fit for a visiting night. Waste is a sin carved deep into every cook's bones, a wordless command handed down from master to apprentice, mother to child. Sometimes, you pause to sit on an upturned cask, lantern set beside you on the stone floor. You breathe in the scents around you. Sharp vinegar, sweet honey, the musky bite of aging cheese. You close your eyes and listen to the faint trickle of water somewhere beyond the wall, the soft rustle of mice you will set traps for come morning. These moments remind you that your world is never still. Even in this hush, life pulses forward. Food aging, fermenting, waiting for its moment to meet the flame. When you stand, you make your rounds again. A hand pressed to the salt barrels, a careful glance at the roots stored in core baskets. You mark in your mind what must be brought up tomorrow for the pot, what must be left alone to grow richer for another week. You carry these tallies with you, always, a secret ledger no parchment could truly hold. Above your head, the castle sleeps. The lord and lady dream behind thick tapestries. The guards pace the walls with spear butts tapping stone. But down here, you stand watch over a different kind of treasure. Grain and meat, cheese and ale. Each a quiet promise that the hearth will blaze tomorrow, that bellies will be filled, that the castle's strength will not waver. When at last you turn toward the steps, lantern lifted high, the shadows slip back into place. The door creaks shut behind you with a sigh of hinges. You climb slowly, your feet steady on each worn stone tread. The warmth of the kitchen beckons at the top, the hearth, the chopping board, the knife waiting to bite into the next day's meal. You pause one last time at the top step, looking back into the hush below. The stores rest in their shadows, patient and loyal, a secret strength beneath the castle's stone skin. You smile to yourself, a small curve of the lips that no one will see, and carry the hush with you as you return to the crackle of the fire, ready to transform these quiet riches into tomorrow's bread, tomorrow's stew, tomorrow's feast. Picture the cold breath of a winter dawn pressing against the castle walls. Above, the battlements stand dusted with frost. The courtyard glimmers under a thin sheen of ice. But down in the belly of the castle, beneath thick stone and timber beams, warmth comes not from the sun, but from the quiet, patient labor of what you have stored, preserved, and hidden away. Imagine yourself at the threshold of the larder once more, a lantern swinging from your hand, its flame dances on hooks that gleam in the half-lit metal warmed by the breath of the earth below, and the press of salted flesh that hangs from them. This place is your second hearth, your silent co-conspirator in the struggle against hunger. Preservation is not a single trick but a careful dance, a collection of old wisdoms passed from hands long buried in the soil. Salt is your oldest ally. In these walls, it is worth more than silver, grain for grain. You run your fingers through the coarse, white crystals stored in a heavy wooden bin. Each pinch drawn over meat pulls moisture away, slowing the decay that would otherwise come creeping in. Beside the salt bean stand barrels marked with simple symbols carved into their lids. One holds herring caught from far-off coasts, each fish cleaned and layered between thick crusts of salt and fragrant herbs, rosemary, juniper, and sometimes the bitter temps of bay. You lift a lid to test the brine with your nose, checking for that sharp edge that means the fish sleeps well, the salt doing its work. Not far off, slabs of pork rest in clay crocks submerged in brine sweetened with honey or beer. Some are turned every few days, lifted by strong arms, their skins slick with a touch of preservation. Others rest untouched. In a low, dark chamber not far from the pantry sits the smokehouse, its ceiling blackened with years of smoldering fires. Hooks jut from beams, each carrying strings of sausages, sides of bacon, fillets of fish. The smoke curls around them, a cloak that chases away the damp, driving deep into the fibers, lending each bite a hint of ash and wood. Step inside that chamber for a moment, feel the warmth still clinging to the stones. Smell the sharp scent of oak or applewood, the bite of pine when it is all you have. You run a hand along a string of sausages, testing the firmness, looking for signs that the skins have dried just enough. Too little smoke, and the meat spoils in the corner shadows. Too much, and it grows bitter. Good for the hounds, but not the Lord's table. Beyond meat and fish lie the quiet miracles of fermentation. The castle, as hidden promise of nourishment when the land gives nothing but stone and snow. Large glazed crocks rest on shelves in the dim light. Some brim with cabbage turned into sharp, crunchy sap. Others hold onions, garlic, even apples layered in brine and spice. The air here is alive in its own subtle way. If you listen closely, you can almost hear the gentle fizz of yeast working, its slow alchemy in the ale barrels stacked in the buttery. The casks are sealed tight with wax and heavy stoppers, but you test them still, knocking on the wood to listen for the hollow note that tells you how the liquid inside shifts and settles. Honey, too, finds its place in the cook's arsenal. In warmer months, hives near the castle orchard yield sticky combs that the kitchen boys bring in baskets, the air buzzing with escaped bees. Once strained, the golden sweetness sits in jars sealed with linen and wax, a preservative as much as a treat. Drizzled over roasted fruits, stirred into hot ale to comfort aching throats, or brushed onto meat to coax out a rich glaze that pleases the Lord Espalade. Look along the shelves at the earthen jars that hold pickled eggs. Small treasures for lean days, when the hens stop laying, and snowberries. The henhouse door. There are bulbs of garlic, peeled and packed away, their bite mellowed by weeks steeping in vinegar and herbs. Roots, too, find new life here. Turnips, sliced thin and salted. Beets, resting in brine, turned pink and tangy. In these rows and barrels, your eye is always watchful for signs of betrayal. A white bloom of mold on the wrong cheese wheel. A crack in a barrel stave that lets in a trickle of air to turn ale sour. Each morning, before the hearth is fed its first log, you visit the stores. A hand on the lid here, a sniff there, a careful tap to test the casks. Each sense sharpens with the hush, your mind running the tally even before your lips shape the words. There is an old superstition among cooks that the stores hold their breath when the steward visits. He comes with parchment and quill, a quick glance at the barrels, a few muttered notes about what must be traded for when the next merchant arrives at the gate. But the real measure lies not in ink but in your eyes, your nose, the weight of a sack lifted and set back down again. You know which corner runs damp in the spring, which shelf stays coldest when the frost bites deepest. These secrets are not written. They live in your fingertips. In the deeper corners, where the light of your lantern flickers like a firefly, lie the oldest mysteries, the cast-offs of the grand feast, scraps transformed by time and care. A pot of dripping saved from roasted meats, its rich fat strained and poured into a clay jar. The bones of a feast, boiled into broth, reduced and sealed in pots to flavor pottage when the meat is long gone. Even the peel of an orange, rare, precious, traded along cold roads from distant groves, finds its place, dried and stored to perfume a pie or brighten a sauce. As you stand in this hush, you sense the soft heartbeat of life pressing against the stones. Outside, winter may rage, the fields frozen and the trees bare. But here, in the dim cold, you have built a shield layer upon layer of salt, smoke, brine, and time. A promise that hunger will not breach these walls easily. When at last you lift your lantern and turn to leave, you pause by the door, listening for any hint. The Something might be amiss. The tiny scurry of a mouse, the drip of water where none should be. Satisfied, you close the heavy door with a gentle push, sealing the stores back into darkness, your secrets tucked away behind the hiss of the hinges. Up the narrow steps, the kitchen waits, its hearth banked, its knives honed. Tomorrow you will draw from these hidden troves, one scoop of flour, one slab of pork, one precious dried apple at a time, weaving them back into warmth and flavor. And when the Lord's guests raise their cups to praise the abundance at his table, they will not think of the hush behind the pantry door, but you will. And in that quiet knowing, you hold the true measure of what keeps the castle strong. Imagine the hush of the pantry when the castle sleeps. The hearth above has burned down to a low, pulsing glow. The scullions lie curled in the warmth they've captured in blankets and straw pallets, and the wind rattles the shutters of the great hall where the last cups of ale have been drained. But down here, in the belly of the keep, the larder keeps its secrets and its perils. You stand in that hush, lantern flickering in your palm. Its light glides across barrels and sacks, catches on the dull glimmer of hooks buried deep in smoked pork, shines briefly in the eyes of a mouse startled near the grain bins. That small shape, quick, clever, endlessly hungry, is as much your adversary as the rot that seeps in when damp rises through the stone. Every good cook knows that the battle is never truly won. The pantry's walls may be thick, its door barred at night, but mice slip through hairline cracks that no eye sees until a nibble of grain or the scatter of droppings gives them away. Rats, too, come in lean seasons, their claws tapping faintly behind the boards. They are drawn by the scent of salted fish, the sweetness of honey, the crumb that escapes the scullion's careless sweep. So, you check the traps each dawn, small wooden boxes baited with a smear of dripping or a crust of bread. The snap of the bar tells you it worked, but the silence does not mean victory. Only that for a day or two, you may rest your watchful eyes. You know to sprinkle fine ash along the pantry floor. In the morning, the tiny tracks mark where whiskers and claws have passed under cover of darkness. A map of your unseen visitors, yet it is not just the small scurry of pests that threatens your stores. The damp that crawls up from the earth can creep unnoticed behind sacks and barrels. You run your fingers along the stone, feeling for the chill that hints at mildew's hidden spread, a musty smell, so faint that only your nose, sharpened by years, bent over barrels and bins, betrays it. A sack of flour, once white and dry, might clump and sour in a single night, if the spring rains seep through the wall as seams. When you find it, you do what must be done. The spoiled flour is carried outside to the midden heap, buried deep so its smell does not call rats from the fields. The shelf is scrubbed with brine or vinegar, the wood left bare to breathe before you dare stack fresh stores upon it. A single overlooked barrel can mean mold that weaves its way through cheeses and dried peas like a patient worm, devouring quietly until your tally comes up short in the bleakest month. And then there are the human hands, the ones that creep in through unlocked doors or forgotten passageways. Not the steward, who comes openly with his parchment and sharp questions, but the kitchen boy who slips a strip of bacon under his tunic when he thinks, do not see, or the hungry maid who, pressed by her own meager rations, tucks an apple into her skirts on her way back from the cellars. You understand this hunger. You feel its echo in your own stomach when the day scraps are thin and the Lord S table grows fat with feasting. But you know also that one stolen egg becomes two. One missing wedge of cheese becomes a whole wheel, and soon the larder's hush turns hollow. So you watch, not cruelly, but with a steady eye. When you catch the boy, you pull him aside, not by the ear, not with harsh words before the others, but with your hand firm on his shoulder. You look him in the eye and show him the ledger you carry in your head. How every side of bacon must last until spring brings fresh pork. How the eggs must be counted against what the hens will lay. When the snow presses the coop door shut, you tell him that when the larder empties, it empties for everyone, the scullions, the stable boys. The cook who stands at the hearth and carves the roast. And so you guard the stores as much with your words as with your traps and your salted walls. You teach the apprentices to wrap the cheese in cloth, to keep the barrels sealed tight, to wipe every crumb from the shelves, so that no mouse grows bold from an easy meal. You pass your hand along the doorframe, checking the iron latch that holds the heavy door closed when the castle sleeps. You mend the small hole where the rats chewed through last winter, stuffing it with stones and mortar mixed by your own hand. Some nights, when the kitchen hearth grows too warm, you slip down to the stores and stand in the hush, letting the coolness rise around your ankles. You listen to the faint drip of moisture, the soft hiss of air that finds its way through cracks, and watch. You breathe the layered scents. Smoke and salt, brine and cheese, rind, the bite of vinegar in the pickling. You feel the weight of it all. The months of planning, the long nights of turning meats on the spit so the drippings could be saved and set aside. The baskets of berries gathered at the summer's peak, boiled with sugar and set in jars for when the snow seals the gates. The ale casks that must be tapped sparingly, lest they run dry before the brewer returns in the spring. In these quiet vigils, you hold a kind of power that few in the castle see. The lord may ride out in fine mail, his banner snapping above his helm, but you guard the strength that feeds his men. The steward may tally coin in the strong room, but you count the casks that keep his winter guest from feeling hunger, espite at the table. You do not carry a sword, nor sit in the hall's high seat, but you stand watch all the same. In the hush, in the shadow, in the gentle creak of the larder door at dawn. When you climb the steps back to the kitchen, you bring the store's secrets with you. You know which cheese must be eaten soon, lest it spoil, which barrel can wait until the next feast, which pot of pickles must be stirred and sealed again. Each meal you craft holds these quiet reckonings, the small calculations that keep the castle fed through lean months and sudden guests alike. Above your head, the crows may call from the battlements, the dogs bark at shadows in the courtyard, but here, you trust the latch, the traps, the quiet discipline you have sown among the kitchen boys. You bank the hearth's coals with the same care you seal a barrel. Each ember, another promise, that tomorrow. Fire will catch that tomorrow, bread will rise that tomorrow. Bread will bubble with the hush of secrets, well kept. In this small, steady world of hooks and barrels, flickering lanterns and hushed foot, you find the true heartbeat of the castle's survival. And as you lay your head near the warmth of the hearth, the hush of the stores lingers in your mind, a soft lullaby that hums you to sleep while the mice hide from your traps. The vinegar seals its sharpness into pickled eggs, and the salt keeps its quiet watch. Picture the castle in the early hush just before dawn. That fleeting moment when the moon's glow still lingers in the courtyard, and the first pale wash of light creeps over the distant hills. You stand at the threshold of the larder once more, your lantern's glow flickering across the cool stone. Around you, the castle seems to hold its breath. You run a hand along the rough lintel of the pantry door, the wood worn smooth by generations of cooks who came before you. How many times did they stand here just as you do now, listening for the faint rustle of mice that might slip past the traps, breathing in the layered scent of brine and smoke, the sweet edge of honey sealed away for some bleak midwinter day. You are more than a cook now. In these moments of hush, you see yourself for what you are, a keeper of quiet promises, a single shoulder pressed against the weight of want. It is a role passed down like an heirloom, one that does not shine in candlelight or echo with the praise sung in the great hall, but one that endures hidden like the salt packed into the joints of venison swinging gently from the hooks overhead. Imagine moving from shelf to shelf, your fingertips grazing the cloth-wrapped cheeses, the tops of the honey jars, the cold iron hoops of the ale casks. Each one holds not just food but time. The summer's warmth caught in the sweetness of the honey, the bite of autumn's winds preserved in the game hung to cure, the slow, dark sleep of roots and pickles that will rouse in the pot when the hearth flickers to life. It is an art that is more felt than spoken. You do not explain these quiet calculations to the pages who come for a jug of ale or a wheel of cheese. They see only the full shelves, the abundance that they carry up the winding steps to the Lord's table. They do not see the spaces you measure in your mind. The gap where a barrel stood, the row of jars that grows thinner as winter leans harder against the walls. In these hidden spaces, you learn patience. Some seasons the hunt is good and the barrels swell with salted meat and fish. Other years, a poor harvest forces you to stretch what you have, thinning the stew with more barley, pressing the bread with coarser meal. You find ways to make do. A clever cook is a quiet alchemist, transforming the humble and the leftover into a meal that warms the belly, if not the tongue. And yet, you know that no amount of cleverness can fully outwit the turning of the seasons. The greatest feasts echo with the knowledge that they are fleeting. One careless winter, one poor harvest, one summer storm that drowns the orchard, can test the stores in ways no knife or ladle can mend. Still, you stand guard. A scullion's sweeping brush cannot chase away every crumb, but you show him where to look, how to find the tiny openings that invite hunger in with claw and whisker. A kitchen boy may be tempted to slip an extra handful of dried peas into his pocket, but he remembers your steady gaze. Not harsh, but unflinching. That reminds him that each stolen morsel may feed him tonight but leave him wanting tomorrow. Even the steward, ledger in hand, leans on your silent vigilance more than he admits. He may demand to see barrels opened, casks tapped, shelves cleared for his counting, but he does not see how you mark the weight of a sack in your arms, how you tap the side of a cask and hear what the wood says back to you. He does not stand in the hush when the world above sleeps, breathing in the quiet promise of salt and smoke that holds the castle together when winter presses close. Above your head, the first sounds of waking echo faintly down the stair. The thud of a guard's boots changing shift, the distant creak of the great hall's door swinging open to let in the dawn's pale chill. The world stirs, but you remain for a moment longer, letting your lantern's glow dance across the jars and barrels like a final blessing. When you close the door, you do so with care, the iron latch falling into place, the cracks sealed against the creeping damp, the tiny teeth and claws that test every shadow. The stores sigh behind the wood and stone, settling back into their dark hush, waiting for your return tomorrow and the day after that. You climb the stairs slowly, your boots tracing the path you know by heart. The cold steps, the worn flagstones, the warmth that blooms again as you near the kitchen hearth. You push open the heavy door and stand in the hush, listening to the gentle crackle of the embers you banked so carefully the night before. The smell of ash and old stew clings to the stones, a comforting echo of the meal yet to come. One by one, the scullions drift in, blinking sleep from their eyes, pulling wool caps low over hair mussed by straw pallets. They nod to you, voices hushed at first, footsteps soft as they fetch water from the well, lay fresh logs on the hearth, and sweep away the ghosts of yesterday's crumbs. The spitboys appear next, their arms thin but strong, ready to shoulder the handle that will turn the next roast. An apprentice stirs the pot that will become the day's first pottage, the steady swirl of the spoon a quiet promise that the rhythm holds. The same hush that guarded the stores now hums through the kitchen, not empty, but full of the slow, steady labor that keeps hunger at bay. And you, the keeper of this small kingdom, stand at its center, one hand resting on the worn edge of the chopping block, the other brushing a faint trace of flour from your sleeve. Above you, banners flutter from the battlement. Beyond the gates, the world spins on, seasons turn, storms gather and pass. But here, beneath the rushes and the barrels and the hush of the stones, you hold your place, patient, watchful, a quiet promise that tomorrow's hearth will blaze again. A pot of pottage already sending up steam to greet the scullions drifting in, hair mussed and voices low. Segment 4. Between two worlds, picture yourself at dawn in the castle kitchen, the hearth crackling softly as the first flames catch. You stand with your back to the warmth, knife in hand, bread dough resting under a linen cloth. You belong here, in the warm belly of the castle. Yet beyond this door, another world waits, glittering, distant, yet always hungry for the work you do. Life as a castle cook means living in two worlds at once. One foot in the servant's domain, the low voices, the rough hands that knead dough, chop roots, scrub the boards. The other foot balanced on the threshold of nobility's sphere, the great hall with its banners, polished goblets, and bright laughter that trickles down the stairwell like an echo from a dream. You know both rhythms well. Here, by the hearth, your world hums with warmth and labor. The slap of dough on a floured board, the gentle hiss of broth bubbling over coals, the scrape of a spoon tasting for salt. This is your kingdom, where your word shapes each task, where apprentices glance at you before carving meat or carrying baskets up the stone stairs, but by the hush of approval at the lord's high table. But when the steward appears parchment in hand, his boots clicking sharply on the flags, you cross into the other realm, the realm where your work is measured not by the warmth of the hearth. Imagine the steward now, a man with a pinched brow and fingers stained with ink. He lists the day's demands without looking at you directly. The lord wishes for fresh trout brought up from the river by dawn, a small pie spiced with cloves to please the visiting merchant, a trencher of sweetmeats for the lady's chamber. The steward speaks of what the lord wants, but never of what the kitchen must stretch to give. His words feel as cold as the stones beneath your feet, but you nod, already weighing his requests against the hush of the stores below. The embers in the hearth, the strong backs of your apprentices. There is a careful distance in these moments. He does not ask how many hands will rub raw, turning the spit for hours, or how much salt will be needed to draw the blood from the trout before the dawn's chill fades. He lives in the realm above, The world of silk sleeves brushing the long table, of candles flickering against stained glass, of music drifting between the rushes and the banners. You live where warmth and labor meet. Yet, you cannot stay here entirely, no matter how steady the hearth's glow. A cook who does not understand the Lord's taste, the lady's small fancies, the rumors carried by the steward's quick tongue, risks more than spoiled broth. A single mistake, too much pepper in the stew, a spoiled egg in the custard, can sour the Lord's favor faster than any spilled wine. So you stand at the edge of the scullery's low doorway, one hand resting on the lintel, listening as the pages whisper what they overheard while clearing the hall. And yet, you know that no amount of cleverness can fully outwit the turning of the seasons. The greatest feasts echo with the knowledge that they are fleeting. One careless winter, one poor harvest, one summer storm that drowns the orchard, can test the stores in ways no knife or ladle can mend. Still, you stand guard. A scullion's sweeping brush cannot chase away every crumb, but you show him where to look, how to find the tiny openings that invite hunger in with claw and whisker. A kitchen boy may be tempted to slip an extra handful of dried peas into his pocket, but he remembers your steady gaze. Not harsh, but unflinching. That reminds him that each stolen morsel may feed him tonight but leave him wanting tomorrow. Even the steward, ledger in hand, leans on your silent vigilance more than he admits. He may demand to see barrels opened, casks tapped, shelves cleared for his counting, but he does not see how you mark the weight of a sack in your arms, how you tap the side of a cask and hear what the wood says back to you. He does not stand in the hush when the world above sleeps, breathing in the quiet promise of salt and smoke that holds the castle together when winter presses close. Above your head, the first sounds of waking echo faintly down the stair. The thud of a guard's boots, changing shift, the distant creak of the great hall's door swinging open to let in the dawn's pale chill. The world stirs, but you remain for a moment longer, letting your lantern's glow dance across the jars and barrels like a final blessing. When you close the door, you do so with care, the iron latch falling into place, the cracks sealed against the creeping damp, the tiny teeth and claws that test every shadow. The stores sigh behind the wood and stone, settling back into their dark hush, waiting for your return tomorrow and the day after that. You climb the stairs slowly, your boots tracing the path you know by heart. The cold steps, the worn flagstones, the warmth that blooms again as you near the kitchen hearth. You push open the heavy door and stand in the hush, listening to the gentle crackle of the embers you banked so carefully the night before. The smell of ash and old stew clings to the stones, a comforting echo of the meal yet to come. One by one, the scullions drift in, blinking sleep from their eyes, pulling wool caps low over hair mussed by straw pallets. They nod to you, voices hushed at first, footsteps soft as they fetch water from the well, lay fresh logs on the hearth, and sweep away the ghosts of yesterday's crumbs. The spitboys appear next, their arms thin but strong, ready to shoulder the handle that will turn the next roast. An apprentice stirs the pot that will become the day's first pottage, the steady swirl of the spoon a quiet promise that the rhythm holds. The same hush that guarded the stores now hums through the kitchen, not empty but full of the slow, steady labor that keeps hunger at bay. And you, the keeper of this small kingdom, stand at its center, one hand resting on the worn edge of the chopping block, the other brushing a faint trace of flour from your sleeve. Above you, banners flutter from the battlements. Beyond the gates, the world spins on, seasons turn, storms gather and pass. But here, beneath the rushes and the barrels and the hush of the stones, you hold your place, patient, watchful, a quiet promise that tomorrow's hearth will blaze again. Segment 4. Between two worlds, picture yourself at dawn in the castle kitchen, the hearth crackling softly as the first flames catch. A pot of pottage already sending up steam to greet the scullions, drifting in, hair mussed and voices low. You stand with your back to the warmth, knife in hand, bread dough resting under a linen cloth. You belong here, in the warm belly of the castle. Yet beyond this door, another world waits. Glittering, distant, yet always hungry for the work you do. Life as a castle cook means living in two worlds at once. One foot in the servants' domain, the low voices, the rough hands that knead dough, chop roots, scrub the boards. The other foot balanced on the threshold of nobility sphere, the great hall with its banners, polished goblets, and bright laughter that trickles down the stairwell like an echo from a dream. You know both rhythms well. Here, by the hearth, your world hums with warmth and labor. The slap of dough on a floured board, The gentle hiss of broth bubbling over coals, the scrape of a spoon tasting for salt. This is your kingdom, where your word shapes each task, where apprentices glance at you before carving meat or carrying baskets up the stone stairs. But when the steward appears parchment in hand, his boots clicking sharply on the flags, you cross into the other realm, the realm where your work is measured not by the warmth of the hearth, but by the hush of approval at the Lord's high table. Imagine the steward now, a man with a pinched brow and fingers stained with ink. He lists the day estimates without looking at you directly. The Lord wishes for fresh trout brought up from the river by dawn, a small pie spiced with cloves to please the visiting merchant, a trencher of sweetmeats for the lady's chamber. His words feel as cold as the stones beneath your feet, but you nod, already weighing his requests against the hush of the stores below. The embers in the hearth, the strong backs of your apprentices. The steward speaks of what the Lord wants, but never of what the kitchen must stretch to give. He does not ask how many hands will rub raw turning the spit for hours, or how much salt will be needed to draw the blood from the trout before the dawn esture fades. He lives in the realm above, the world of silk sleeves brushing the long table, of candles flickering against stained glass, of music drifting between the rushes and the banners. You live where warmth and labor meet. Yet, you cannot stay here entirely, no matter how steady the hearth's glow. A cook who does not understand the Lord's taste, the lady's small fancies, the rumors carried by the steward's quick tongue, risks more than spoiled broth. A single mistake, too much pepper in the stew, a spoiled egg in the custard, can sour the Lord's favor faster than any spilled wine. So you stand at the edge of the scullery's low doorway, one hand resting on the lintel, listening as the pages whisper what they overheard while clearing the hall. Complaint about the ale, the lady's delight in the sugared pears, the Lord's praise for the pie crust that cracked just so under his knife. These scraps of praise and grumbles are your coin, as precious as the salt packed around the ham in a larder. Your apprentices know the shape of this balance too. The spit boys, faces smudged with ashajic among themselves as they rub fat over the turning haunch. But their ears stay sharp for the creak of boots. That means the steward draws near. The scullions bend low over their scrubbing, but they glance up when the steward's shadow crosses the hearth. There is an old understanding here. The castle-less nobility need not notice you until you fail. A cook who does his work well remains unseen, a ghost behind the warmth of the hearth, a name spoken only when the steward tallies the stores and praises the feast of the Lord. A cook who lets the bread go stale or the meat turn sour finds his name carried on sharper tongues. Servants gossiping behind rush-strewn corridors, a barbed word at the high table that drifts down the stairs like a cold wind. So you tend the balance like an ember banked in ash. You listen without seeming to listen. You speak when it matters. A quiet word to the steward that the trout are scarce this week. A gentle reminder that the stores must be stretched if the merchants stay longer than promised. You stand near the kitchen door when the lady's maid comes down to ask for a cup of warmed wine or a bit of honey for her mistress Esther. You watch her eyes flick around the shelves, gauging what you have tucked away, weighing in her mind what might be asked for next. Yet when you return to the hearth, you step back into warmth that the hall above never truly knows. Here, your word is law. You tap the dough with your knuckle, and the apprentice knows to cover it. You taste the stew, and the scullion watches your face, waiting for a nod that tells him the salt is right. There is trust here, woven through burnt fingers, aching arms, and the hush that falls when the bread rises. Just so, and yet, you never forget that the warmth you hold must climb the stone stairs each day. It must arrive at the high table, as pies, with flaky crusts, haunches roasted to a rich brown, trenchers heavy with savory pottage that spills warmth into the noble bellies. The guests may not know your name, but they taste your labor in each bite. Sometimes, on rare occasions when the castle feasts for a holy day or a visiting lord, you are summoned to stand in the doorway of the hall. You see it then, the long tables lit by dripping candles, the lord at the high seat, his ringed hands resting on the polished board, the murmur of voices, the gleam of jewels at a lady's throat. You stand in your rough tunic, your hands still carrying the faint scent of onions and ash, and bow your head when the steward says your name. A word of praise may come, drifting from the Lord's lips. A nod from the lady, her fingers still sticky with sweetmeats, you spent hours shaping by the flicker of the hearth. The minstrels pluck their strings, a page spills wine in his haste, laughter swells to the beams, and then you slip back through the doorway, your boots carrying you down the cold steps to the kitchen, where the fire still burns. Between these two worlds you live, the warmth and the cold, the hush and the laughter, the heavy air of the larder, and the perfume swirl of the high table. You hold them together in the same hands that knead dough, stir stews, check the cheese for mold, and, in this balance, you find your place. Not fully seen, not fully hidden, but steady as the hearth that feeds both worlds. Picture the hush of the castle's corridors in the soft hours after the noon meal. Somewhere, the Lord's steward bends over his ledgers by the light of a narrow window, his quill scratching out tallies of grain and barrels of ale. In the great hall, scraps of conversation still cling to the rushes, a merchant's boast, a lady's gentle laughter, the scrape of a dog's claws sniffing for fallen bones. And you, the cook, stand on the edge of it all, not fully part of the bustling servant world where maids chatter as they mend torn sleeves, nor ever truly welcome in the polished hush of the high table. You hover where warmth and status meet, necessary but overlooked, known but unseen. In this place, you learn the soft art of watching. Standing half in the shadows near the stair that climbs to the hall, you listen to the pages carry the scraps of the noble world down to your heart. A page might whisper that the steward seems tense this week, that the Lord's mood soured when the wine cask ran low, that the lady asked for a dish she tasted in another hall far away rich, with almonds and raisins you don't yet have. These fragments are your signposts. You'll gather them as surely as you gather herbs from the garden. A sprig here, a leaf there, pressed between the day's chores until they shape your next step. They guide your choices before you stand at the pantry's door. Which stores to guard, which barrels to tap. When to slip a word to the steward about a merchant who might carry spices you can spare coin for this winter. Yet you are not one of them. The pages, the stewards, the maids. They speak freely when you pass, but their words catch in their throats when you pause too long. You are not just another servant carrying buckets up the stair. You carry the castle's warmth in your hands, and warmth, in this world, is both power and burden. Sometimes you find yourself called upward, the rare moment when the Lord wishes to taste a new dish, or the lady wants to see the sweetmeats before they reach her tray. You step into the glow of the hall's tall windows, the smell of rushes and candle wax mixing with the faint aroma of spiced wine drifting up from the goblets. You bow your head, your hair still carrying the scent of smoke, your fingers rough from days spent at the chopping board. The steward stands near, quill and parchment-ready eyes flicking between you and the Lord. A question is asked, about the tenderness of the venison, about whether the pears will be ripe for the next holy day. You answer softly, each word weighed with care. You speak the truth. No more, no less. The right word eases the tension in the steward's shoulders. The wrong word might see you back at the hearth, with the sting of disappointment burning hotter than any coal. In these brief crossings, you glimpse their world. The Lord's rings catching the firelight, the lady's gown trailing across the rushes, the minstrels warming their hands before they take up their strings again. You stand just close enough to smell the beeswax that polishes the hall's carved chairs, but not so close that you belong to any seat at that table. And so, you slip away as soon as you can, back through the corridor, past the tapestry that muffles the door's low creak, down the narrow stair where your boots knock softly on the stone, carrying you back into the steady hum of your domain. There, the kitchen holds its own warmth, a warmth that the hall above only borrows. Here, the scullions kneel over buckets of soapy water, their chatter weaving through the steam rising from the hearth. An apprentice grins as he shapes a new loaf, the dough sticky under his palms. A spit boy rubs his arm, sore from turning the handle through the long roast, but smiles when you pass him a small wedge of cheese, his reward for patience and care. These are your people, not the stewards with their quills, nor the pages with their gossip, but these boys and girls who stir, scrub, slice, and carry. They share your secrets, the hidden signs that the butter will sour if left too close to the hearth, the faint scent that tells you when a joint must be cooked that night or lost to rot. They lean on your knowledge, and in turn you trust them to watch your stores when your back is turned. Yet even here, the high table hovers like a distant bell. The plates they scrub, the knives they hone, the trenchers they stack on worn boards, all climb the stair each day to the realm where your name is not spoken. The spit boy may wonder aloud what the Lord said about the roast. The scullion may giggle over tailies of the lady's gown, but they know, as you do, that they will never wear silk nor taste the sweetness of wine poured from a silver jug. And so you make your peace with this edge you stand on. You wrap your fingers around it like the hilt of a good knife, steady, sharp, welly. You know that the bread must be coarse enough to feed the servants, but soft enough to soak the Lord's rich gravy. You know that the ale and the buttery must stretch through the lean months, yet taste fresh when the steward draws the first cup for a visiting night. In the hush between these two worlds, you keep your secrets close. You know that the cheese in the furthest corner of the pantry can turn rancid if left another week. But you save it for the scullions, knowing they will not complain. You see the root sellers' baskets thinning, the last onions growing soft under their papery skins. But you layer them into stews that fill bellies before the hunger can creep too close. Some nights you stand in the kitchen's doorway, staring up the stair that winds toward the great hall. You hear the echoes of laughter, the tap of a goblet on wood, the low strum of a lute drifting down. You do not envy it, not truly. You know that warmth taken for granted burns out too quickly. The warmth you tend lives in your coals, your barrels, your patient watch. When at last the echoes fade and the hearth's glow settles into a soft sigh, you draw your cloak around your shoulders and step into the hush of the stores once more. A final look at the barrels, a gentle tap on the cask to test its strength, a hand pressed to the cloth covering the cheese. In these small, constant tasks, you hold your place. Steady on the edge between want and plenty, labor and praise, the hush of the cellar and the sparkle of the hall. You close your eyes for a moment, listening to the gentle breath of the castle in its sleep. Tomorrow, the pages will whisper more gossip, the steward will tally more barrels, the lord will raise his cup, and the hearth will flicker back to life, and you, neither noble nor fully servant, will stand exactly where you have always stood, between two worlds, patient and watchful, the keeper of warmth that feeds them all. Picture the castle in the hush that comes just after the evening meal. The scraps have been cleared from the great hall goblets set aside to be polished, and the pages slip down the stair with their arms full of used trenchers and half-empty pitchers. The steward stands at the head of the hall, head bent, with a quiet word for the lord about tomorrow's hunt, tomorrow's guests, tomorrow's cost. And you, the cook, stand once more at your watch, nearer enough to the shadows that no one looks twice, yet close enough to catch the scraps that matter. Words float down like drifting embers. The lady has asked for her favorite almond pudding for the next feast. The merchant who brings the rare spices will stay 3 nights instead of 1. The steward worries that the ale and the buttery will not stretch if the merchants drink deep. These words do not feel like secrets when they're spoken so carelessly, but you know they are treasures all the same. You tuck them away like salt rubbed into a slab of pork, preserving them against the hunger that may come later. For gossip here is more than idle talk. It is the low murmur that tells you when to guard your stores, when to bargain for extra root vegetables, when to let the scullions know to leave the hearth burning long into the night. Among the servants, gossip curls like smoke. It drifts from the great halls, rushes to the kitchen's hearth, carried on whispered jokes and small, careful complaints. The spit boy swears he saw the steward slip an extra flask of wine to the merchantess men. The scullion claims the lady S made sneaks sweetmeats from the pantry when the cookess back is turned. You'll listen, not with harsh suspicion, but with the same calm patience you give to the pots simmering on the coals. You know the difference between stories spun to fill an empty hour and truths that shape your next choice. A careless word about the steward's temper tells you when to hold your tongue if he comes downstairs with ink stains on his fingers and a ledger held tight to his chest. A boast from the stable hand about fresh game from the forest tells you to expect a side of venison at your door come dawn. And in this quiet web of words, you guard not only your stores, but your people too. You watch how the scullion's shoulders tense when the steward's boots tap on the stones. You notice how the spit boy's arm trembles from the endless turning when the feasting lasts long past sundown. You remember who worked through the night to salt the fish when the spring thaw came too fast, and who stayed behind to bank the hearth's embers when the others slipped off to their straw pallets. Loyalty here is not shouted in grand oaths before the Lord. It lives in small moments. A wedge of cheese slipped to a hungry boy after hours at the spit, a word of praise for a scullion who learns to knead dew until it sighs under his hands. You hold these ties close, binding them like the twine that wraps a bundle of herbs hanging above the hearth. You know that when the winter closes in or the stores grow thin, these bonds will hold tighter than any chain the steward carries in his ledgers. The castle's fortunes shift like the wind rattling the battlements. A season of good harvests fills the barrels and brings laughter to the hall above. The lord's purse heavy enough to summon musicians and traveling merchants with rare treats. Cinnamon, sweet, dried fruits that brighten the simplest pie. But a poor season comes just as Italy rains that drown the fields, frost that bites the orchard's buds before they bloom. Then the hush grows heavier in the pantry, each sack of flour weighed twice, before it is poured into the dough. In those lean months, the whispers grow sharper. Who is taking too much? Who hides a crust of bread in a pocket when they think no one sees? The line between hunger and loyalty grows thin as the edge of your knife. It is in these times that your steady hand matters most. Imagine yourself now, standing in the pantry doorway on a bitter January night. The wind hums through cracks in the stone, slipping in to test the cloth wraps on the cheese wheels. You check each one by touch, fingers cold but careful, pressing for softness that should not be there. In the corner, you hear the faint scuff of boots on the rushes, the spit boy, awake when he should be asleep, hoping for a crust to fill the hollow in his belly. You do not scold him. You break a piece from the loaf, you keep aside, your own hidden share for just such moments. You press it into his palm, rough and warm, and tell him that tomorrow he must sweep the ashes more carefully, stir the pot more gently so the broth goes further. He nods, eyes wide, the crust already halfway to his mouth before you finish your sentence. In that exchange, you hold the balance of hunger and trust. A simple bargain that keeps the kitchen's rhythm steady even when the wind claws at the shutters. Above, the high table still demands its share. The steward will come for the best cut, the freshest loaf, the clear ale that must not sour. You give it willingly, not from fear, but because you know that warmth flows upward as surely as it seeps from the hearth's coals. A cold lord means a cold household. A satisfied table above means a quieter hush below. Sometimes, you slip up the stair when the hall is empty, just to stand in its vast hush, and remind yourself why you guard your hearth so fiercely. The tapestries hang heavy on the walls, muting the draughts that creep along the stones. The long table stands bare but for the faint ghost of spilled wine and the scent of candle wax gone soft and sweet. You run your fingers along the polished wood, the same hands that shape dough, that pack salt around fish, that check the cheese for mold. You wonder in those moments if the Lord ever stands at the edge of your hearth, if he knows how the hush you hold below feeds the laughter above. But you do not dwell long on that thought. You slip back down the stair, your boots tapping lightly on the stone, the hush of the hall falling behind you like a cloak shed at the door. Back in the kitchen, the spit boy snores near the dying coals. The scullions mumble in their sleep, curled on pallets, tucked in corners where the warmth holds longest. You bank the embers one last time, pressing ash over the faint glow, listening to the slow hush that fills the space like a lullaby. In this hush, you hear the true measure of your work, not in the praise carried on the steward's parchment, nor the laughter that rings from the high table, but in the steady breathing of those who trust you to keep the hearth warm. When the wind howls at the gate, you know the gossip will drift again tomorrow. The steward's boots will tap out their message. The Lord's appetite will grow and fade like the moon in the sky, and you will stand as you always have. In the hush, the warmth, the gentle web of loyalty that holds the castle's breath steady through feast and famine alike. Picture the castle, in that deep, velvet hour, just before the dawn breaks. The stones still heavy with night's chill, the courtyard washed in the pale light of a waning moon. The high table sleeps behind thick curtains and wooden shutters drawn tight against the cold. But here, at the edge of the hearth, you, the cook, stand awake, a steady shape in the hush that holds these two worlds together. The embers you banked so carefully the night before glow faintly now, a soft heartbeat pulsing through the kitchen. You kneel to coax the first flames to life, blowing gently until sparks catch in the dry kindling. The spit boy stirs in his pallet, rubbing sleep from his eyes, already rising to fetch water from the well. In the scullery, the oldest maid slips in to stoke the smaller fires, her breath curling in the half-light. These small moments are your true dominion. The world before the steward's boots tap across the stones, before the Lord's hunger shapes the day's tasks. Here, you are neither noble nor peasant, yet you carry a piece of both in your hands. You move through the kitchen with the hush wrapped around your shoulders like a cloak. You check the dough resting by the hearth, the soft swell of it promising tomorrow's bread. You dip a ladle into the cold broth from last night's bones, a base for the day's first pottage, but warming for the stable boys who will spend their hours outside, beating their hands against their thighs to chase away the frost. Above your head, banners hang limp in the hall's draught. They will flutter later when the doors swing wide to greet guests or when the lady's maid carries a tray of warm ale to the Lord's chamber. But you know that every rustle, every shimmering edge of those banners, rests on the warmth you tend down here. Your quiet craft feeds the rhythm that keeps the hall from growing hollow. In this gentle balance, You see truths others miss. The steward may stand with ink-smudged fingers, counting casks and calculating what must be stretched or traded, but you know the true measure lies in the scullion's careful hands, as he scrubs the trenchers clean enough to be used again. In the spit boy's patience as he stuns watch, so the meat browns evenly, fat hissing into the flames. In the small gossip that flows a ruined, the chopping block, like warm broth on a cold day. Scraps of knowledge that guide your next choice before the stewardess parchment can catch up. And you see, too, the quiet fears that drift in with the drafts. The worry that the stores will run thin if spring comes late, that the Lord's guests will stay longer than the larder can bear, that one spoiled barrel or sack will summon blame to the cook's door faster than any praise for a well-roasted goose. Yet through these worries, you stand, not with the authority of a lord at the high table nor the trembling humility of a servant who bows too low. You stand as a thread woven between the stones and the banners, binding both worlds with each loaf you shape, each barrel you tap, each ember you guard through the longest nights. Sometimes you wonder if the Lord truly knows how much he owes to this hush you tend. When he raises his goblet to toast a visiting merchant, he tastes your labor in the sweetness of the wine that came from the cask you tested at dawn. When the lady praises the custard for its delicate spice, she praises the hidden gamble you made, spending the last pinch of nutmeg you bartered from a traveling trader half a year ago. You ask for no recognition, not really. Praise is a brief warmth, but the hearth's glow must last longer. You find your reward in smaller things. The way the spit boy smiles when you slip him an extra crust. The hush that settles over the kitchen when the meal is served and all the workers come together. Like a quiet prayer spoken not in words but in the rising steam of a good stew. Even the gossip, the endless swirl of secrets and worries, is part of the fabric you tend. You let it flow around you like water around a stone, sifting truth from tale, holding tight to what matters. You know which rumor to carry to the stewardess' ear at the right moment, and which to bury at the base of the hearth, never to climb the stair. When you stand in the larder's hush, hand pressed to a barrel, you feel the castle's breath steady itself against the long stretch of winter. When you bend over the hearth, ladle swirling slowed circles through the pot, you feel the castle's heartbeat steady and sure, fed by the warmth you watch so closely. You are not noble, yet the warmth you keep shapes the whole above. You are not servant alone, yet the scullions and spit boys look to you when the wind rattles the windows and hunger scratches at the door. You are both, and neither the hidden steward of the castle's humblest treasures. As dawn slips through the cracks above the courtyard, you stand by the hearth, wiping your hands on your apron. The stew bubbles softly, the bread rises under its cloth, the coals sigh with each new breath of flame. The steward will come soon, parchment in hand. The pages will descend for fresh bread and ale. The Lord's boots will echo in the hall as he paces, hungry for the warmth that only you can offer. And so you stay where you always have, on the quiet edge between warmth and want, gossip and loyalty, the hush of the hearth and the glittering glow of the high table. A single thread, woven through the stone, the rushes, the banners that flutter high above your head. In the warmth, you find your rest, and in the steady heartbeat of the hearth you guard, you hold the castle's breath, one quiet meal at a time. Segment 5, Beyond the Walls. The threads that feed the hearth Imogen. Now the castle, not from within its thick stone belly, but from the edge of the fields, where the mist clings to dawn. Beyond the towers and battlements, a patchwork of fields stretches out, stitched together by winding lanes, low dry stone walls, and the slow breath of cattle rising into the crisp air. For the castle cook, these fields and lanes are as much a part of the hearth as the logs that flicker in its grate. Your stores are not built by your hands alone. They carry the warmth of distant labor, the soft weight of calloused palms that lift the sacks you will one day open in the hush of your larder. Picture the farmer's wife up before the sun, head bent low as she scatters grain for the hens that will lay the eggs you tuck into pies. Picture the orchard boy, balancing on a ladder to gather apples before the frost bruises their sweetness. Picture the hunter moving like a shadow at the edge of the forest, bow-drawn breath clouding the air as he waits for the deer that will one day hang in your pantry. Salted and wrapped against the creep of every loafy shape carries the echo of these hidden hands. Every part of pottage holds a field's slow turning, rain falling soft on furrows, grain sprouting and swaying under a summer sun, scythes whispering through the stalks. The barrels of ale stacked in your buttery remember the brewer's careful tending, the grain soaked, The mash stirred, the casks sealed and marked with chalk so the steward can nod approval at the tally. Beyond the fields, the village stirs, a small cluster of thatched roofs leaning together like gossiping neighbors. The blacksmith's hammer beats out its slow rhythm, shaping hinges and hooks you rely on to hang your pans above the fire. The miller stands ankle deep in flour dust, mind half on his grindstones and half on the price he might fetch when the steward sends a page with another sack of grain. Even the children playing at the edge of the village paths pause to watch the carts roll toward the castle gate, baskets of cabbages, onions, and roots bumping gently in the ruts. The cook's world is bound to these lives, though they may never see your hearths glow. You know which farmer's grain stays dry through a damp season, which orchard weathers the storms, which beekeeper's hives yield the thickest combs of honey to brighten your plainest stew. You keep these names tucked in the same hush you carry through the pantry. Quiet promises whispered in the crackle of logs, the swirl of the ladle through broth. Sometimes, when the castle sleeps and your feet ache from the day's tally, you step beyond the gates at dawn or dusk. You stand at the edge of the yard where the kitchens dump their peelings and scraps for the pigs. You look across the fields and smell the damp earth, the faint sweetness of hay, the sharp bite of wood smoke drifting from cottages just waking or just settling into sleep. These moments remind you that the hush you tend is not trapped by the castle's stones. It stretches outward, a thread spun from soil to hearth to hall. When winter's grasp tightens, you know the village hearths burn the same as yours, small flames fighting the long dark, each belly filled by hands that labor unseen. Not all ties beyond the wall are warm. Merchants come through the gates with wagons creaking under barrels of salted fish, sacks of dried peas, crates of spices that drift their sharp scents into the pantry shadows. They bargain hard, eyes quick to weigh the steward's purse, the cook's subtle worry about stores running thin. You stand just behind the steward's elbow when needed, voice calm, mind sharper than any blade on your board. One wrong trade, one cask spoiled by damp, and the hush in your larder turns brittle, hunger pressing through its cracks like wind under a door. Still, you know when to speak and when to stand silent. You remember which merchant cheats on the measure, whose barrels split under the lightest tap, and you remember who offers fair trade when the castle's coffers run lean. You hold these truths in the hush of your mind as carefully as you turn a loaf in the oven. As heat, there are seasons when the road brings more than wagons. Sometimes it brings travelers seeking shelter under the castle's high walls, pilgrims, minstrels, messengers with boots stained by miles. They pause at your kitchen door, heads bent low, hands out for a crust and a ladle of broth. You weigh the hush in your stores and the trust in your steward's nod. A scrap of bread costs you little if it eases a night as hunger. Yet you watch how many times a traveler Espo returns, how often the road takes more than it gives. In the hush of these exchanges, you glimpse stories that never reach the Lord's table. Tales of a harvest blighted by hail, a day before cutting, a child lost to fever when the healer's herbs failed, a cart overturned in a spring flood, barrels of apples drifting like lanterns down the river. These tales settled deep in the hush of your stores, a reminder that what you guard is more than meat and salt. It is the memory of all the labor loss and hope carried through the gate, each dawn. When you step back inside the kitchen, boots dusted with mud, breath sharp with the field's cold bite, you stand for a moment by the hearth. You let the warmth ease the stiffness from your hands. You look at the spit boy snoring near the embers, the scullion stacking bowls with sleepy care, the apprentices rolling dough under your quiet eye. You see the hidden fields in each face, the barley swaying under summer's gold sun, the orchard's boughs heavy with fruit, the bees humming around hives fat with honey. You see the roads, dust, the merchant's shrewd grin, the village hearths flickering far beyond the towers, and you carry it all back to the hush you hold here, your promise that tomorrow's bread will rise, the stew will fill each bowl, the stores will weather the cold once more. Outside, the road winds, on a thin line binding your hearth to a world you tend, without ever truly stepping beyond the gate. And in this gentle edge between field and stone, trade and trust, want and plenty, you find your quiet place, keeper of the hush that feeds the flame, one careful loaf at a time. Imagine now the hush of the castle, not just in a single dawn or dusk, but across the full turning of the year. See how your hands, rough from the hearth's heat and the cold stone floor, follow the same quiet path, again and again, no matter how the banners above rise or fade. In spring, the land breathes awake. The air slips into the kitchen door when you crack it open for a breath after the long winter. It smells of wet earth, of thawed thatch, of shoots breaking through the frost-hardened fields. You stand for a moment on the threshold, eyes still adjusting from the soft shadows of the pantry, and you feel the promise of it. Fresh eggs in the henhouse, green shoots for the pottage, the first herbs, yellow pluck from the kitchen garden to brighten a broth gone dull through the cold months. The scullions gather rushes to spread fresh over the kitchen floor. They scrape soot from the hearthstones, their hands black to the wrists, but faces bright with the warmth that comes when the wind shifts gentler. You walk the garden rows with the steward once the soil is soft enough, pointing where the onions must be bedded, where the parsley will catch the morning sun. You know which patch will grow the best sage to hang and dry for roasting meat come autumn, feasting. Spring is hope, but it is also the hush of caution. One frost too late in the season, one rain that pools in the gardens, dips, and the tender shoots rot before they rise. You watch the sky as you watch your pots, reading the wind bite, the same way you test broth for salt. The pages might gossip about the lady's new gown, the merchants in the hall, the stewardess' short temper, but you listen instead for the far-off thunder that says the road may be washed out before the next cask of ale arrives. Summer comes gently at first, then with a heat that makes the kitchen walls sweat. The hearth's warmth turns heavy, clinging to your skin, even when the scullions fling open the shutters for a breath of breeze. You roll dough with your sleeves pushed back, flour dusted on your forearms like the pale petals that drift from the orchard trees before the fruit comes. The fields around the castle grow thick and green. You know the rhythm without seeing it. The hay cut and turned in the meadow, the grain stalks heavy under the sun. The village children trail behind their mothers in the garden rows, baskets bumping their hips as they gather beans, herbs, onions for market. You see their shadows flicker through the gates as they wait for the stewardess measure, a few coins, a nod that their crop will fill your pantry shelves. In summer you dry what you can. Apples sliced thin and spread on cloths near the kitchen's warm stones. Herbs tied in bunches, upside down, their scent drifting through the rafters above the hearth. You send the scullions into the woods with baskets for mushrooms, for the bright greens that spring up where the shade holds the last of the rain. You think ahead with each handful of salt you rub into fish or meat. Not for today's table, but for the days when snow will press against the window slits and you will stand at the larder door, counting what remains. Autumn's edge brings a hush of urgency. The orchard drips with fruit. You test each apple with the pad of your thumb. Firm but not so tight it snaps in the barrel. The cider press creaks and groans. The scullions slip on spilled juice as they roll barrels to the pantry's cool corner. You taste a sip of the sharp, sweet liquid, storing the memory of its promise for midwinter when fresh sweetness will be a memory in itself. You help butcher the pigs, sleeves rolled, knives honed on whetstones that sing a soft, steady song. The spit boys and the apprentices stand by, waiting for your nod to hang the joints in the smokehouse, to scatter salt over slabs that must not spoil before the first frost does its part. The air fills with a sharp scent of smoke and brine, a scent that drifts through your dreams long after you bank the hearth for the night. When the days shorten, you mark the shift not by the stewardess tally, but by the hush that falls when the field's empty. The farmers trudge through the gates with carts piled high, the last onions, the final baskets of wrinkled pears. You check each crate by lantern light, thumb pressing gently at the bruises, ear bent to the creak of barrels set to near the damp wall. Winter comes slow, then all at once. The first snow drifts against the courtyard gate, then the wind howls through the arrow slits, until the scullions stuff them with rags. The hearth's glow feels deeper now, its warmth a shield you keep banked and fed. Even when the stores shrink day by patient day, the kitchen grows closer in these months. The spit boy wraps his thin blanket tighter around his shoulders. When he dozes near the embers, the scullions speak softer voices muffled by wall caps pulled low over their ears. You stand watchful over every loaf of bread that comes from the oven. Not too thick a crust, not too wide a crumb, each slice meant to carry the castle through until the earth turns soft again. Some nights you stand alone at the pantry door, lantern in hand, breath misting before your lips. You listen for the hush that tells you the store's whole. No scratch of mice in the grain sacks, no drip where the cold might slip through the stone. You rest your palm on the cheese wheels, firm under your touch. You tap the barrels listening for the hollow note that says the ale still sits deep enough for one more feast. One more quiet meal for the stable hands, who break ice in the troughs while the noble hall dreams in silk. In this steady turn, spring to summer, summer to autumn, autumn folding into the hush of winter, you find the rhythm that shapes your own bones. Each season leaves its mark, flower ground into the creases of your hands, the scent of smoke woven through your sleeves, the bite of winter air in your lungs when you step outside to trade a nod with the orchard keeper at the gate, and always, you stand at the edge where the world's turning meets the steady flicker of your hearth. Above, the Lord's hall will echo with laughter or hush with worry, depending on how well the stores hold. Below, the scullions will sleep easier knowing their bellies are warm, that tomorrow's bread will rise under your careful watch. You know the seasons will keep turning, no matter how many winters you stand at the pantry door, counting apples, pressing your thumb into cheese, listening for the faint hush of the barrel's promise. You know that someday, another will stand where you stand now, their hands dusted with flour, their eyes tracing the sky for signs of rain or frost. But tonight, the hearth holds steady, the stew sips, the bread rises under its cloth. The hush lives in the quiet promises you have shaped with each season's turning, a promise that hunger will not breach these stones. Not tonight, not while the coals glow warm under your careful hands. Picture yourself now at the edge of the orchard in late autumn, the last of the leaves drifting down to gather in soft drifts against the stone wall. You stand for a moment with a basket at your feet, the rough weave pressing an imprint against your ankle. One final apple rests in your palm, its skin cold and mottled where the chill has brushed it in the night. In this simple shape, you see the story of your craft, the promise that warmth and hunger meet quietly, season after season. You turn the apple over in your hand, thumb tracing the small scars where hail tapped it in the spring, where birds pecked at its sweetness in summer's deep green hush. You know, even now, how you'll slice it thin, lay it on a cloth near the hearth, so the warmth dries its flesh to sweetness. You can tuck into a pie in some deep winter dusk. The hush you guard does not live only in barrels and sacks behind your pantry door. It lives in these small gestures. The careful cut of the knife, the cloth folded to cradle what might otherwise spoil unseen, the baskets laid by the scullion's pallet so the bruised fruit feeds the pot before it feeds the mice. You carry your harvest down the path to the kitchen yard, the mud thick around your boots, the chill pressing at your shoulders. The courtyard lies quiet in this hour, a few hens scratching in the straw, a stable boy whistling softly as he mends a broken gate latch. The cook's place is not in the stable or the field, yet your steps weave through each corner, a silent tether, drawing the world's labor inward, toward the glow you tend. Inside, the hearth greets you with its slow, constant voice. A pop of sap in the log, the soft crackle of coals shifting under the iron pot. The scullions look up from their work, eyes bright in the glow that softens the edges of this stone-bellied room. They know the pattern too. Without a word, the youngest boy clears a place on the rough table for your basket. The oldest wipes his palms on his apron before he lifts each apple, testing for softness, sorting bruise from firm flesh. You watch them work and see yourself in their bent shoulders. Not just now, but in years to come. You see the hush you guard outliving your hands, passed down in whispered instructions about salt and smoke, about barrels marked with a single scratch to catch the eye in dim light. You see the small nods of loyalty that slip between words when a loaf comes out of the oven browned just so, or when a scullion's tired hand finds a crust tucked in his palm at dawn. Sometimes, when the wind howls at the arrow slits and rattles the kitchen door, you stand near the hearth and listen to the world testing your hush. You feel the push of hunger at the edges of the stone, a restless scratching that knows the truth, that warmth can never be taken for granted. A spoiled barrel, a late frost, a single careless flame left to gutter out before its time. All can open the hush like a cracked door, letting the cold slip in. And yet, you do not fear it. You have learned that the hush does not break, it is stitched together by hands like yours. Hands that carry baskets down muddy paths, that tap casks with a knuckle to listen for the echo that says, the stores will hold. Hands that know the weight of flour pressed through the palm, the scent of brine that means the fish will last until the river thaws. Above you, the lord and lady dream of warm beds and feasting days yet to come. The steward, with his quill and tally marks, trusts in his sums. But you, in the hush behind the hearth, trust the quieter truths. You trust the sound of the cheese wheel when your thumb presses its cloth. You trust the spit boy's patience at the handle, The scullion's quick fingers finding every crumb that might invite a mouse to share the stores. Outside the kitchen, the world slips deeper into winter's sleep. The fields lie bare now, the orchard a memory of sweetness stored in the barrels tucked behind your pantry door. The village beyond the gate tends its own hush. Cottage hearths flickering like lanterns in the dark, each flame another quiet covenant that the wind and cold will not have the last word. You know these cottages well, though you stand within the castle's walls. You know the orchard keeper as mother who slips you an extra basket of pears when the stewardess coin grows tight. You know the miller's son who runs barefoot to the gate with a sack of flour when the storm chokes the road. You know the small kindnesses that feed your stores just as surely as salt and smoke do. A hush that stretches far beyond the stone. Sometimes, late in the night, you stand in the kitchen doorway, the glow of the hearth at your back. You watch the snow falling soft in the courtyard, the flakes catching the lantern light until they vanish in the dark. You listen to the faint creak of the scullion's pallet, the low hum of the spit boy's breath where he sleeps curled near the warm stones. In that hush, you hear the castle's true breath, not the laughter that echoes off the banners in the hall above, but the steady heartbeat that holds through every season. You feel the hush settle into your bones like a prayer, old and patient. It does not need words to remind you of your place. Keeper of the stores, steward of the flame, quiet promise that the world will find its warmth again when the wind claws at the windows. Tomorrow will come, the scullion's chatter, the steward's boots tapping out a fresh tally, the merchant's wagon creaking through the gate with new barrels to test. But tonight, the hush holds. The bread waits under its cloth, the cheese rests in its wrapping. The last apple, sliced and laid to dry, promises sweetness when the snow drifts deepest. And you stand in the doorway, the warmth at your back, the hush in your hands, the promise in your chest that the hearth will catch each flame the world brings to it, and feed the castle's breath one careful meal at a time. Imagine now the castle wrapped in deep night, a silence so complete you can almost hear the old stones settling, sighing softly under their own weight. Above, banners hang still, limp in the hush that drifts through the high beams of the great hall. Somewhere far off, a lone owl calls from the orchard's edge, its cry slipping through arrow slits to brush your ear where you stand at the hearth. The embers glow low behind the iron grate. You stand with one hand resting on the worn stone, feeling its warmth pulse into your palm. The kitchen around you breathes gently, the scullions curled on their straw pallets in the shadows. The spit boy's feet tucked close to the hearth, his face slack with a sleep he has earned. Even the spoons, the knives, the bowls, stacked on shelves seem to doze, waiting for dawn to rouse them back to use. You know now, in this deepest hush, that your work is more than bread and broth. It is a covenant older than these stones, a promise that while you keep watch, the world's hungers will not find an open door. Each loaf shaped under your hands, each pot tended with quiet patience, each barrel turned and checked by lantern light, they all whisper the same truth. Warmth must be tended not only with fire but with care that slips through the unseen cracks. Beyond these walls, the world shifts in its restless sleep. The road winding away from the gate lies under frost now, its ruts filled with thin pools of ice that glint when the moon leans close. The village hearths flicker like shy stars, each a small echo of your own. Somewhere in a cottage, a mother leans over a pot that bubbles just enough to hold back the dark for another night. Somewhere, a miller tests his stones with an ear pressed close, listening for the low song that means tomorrow's flour will come through true. And here, at the heart of it all, you stand where warmth and want touch, the thin place where your hush keeps the wind-esque claws outside the pantry door. You think of the orchard in bloom, of the cheese aging slowly in the cool, of the salted meat swinging gently on its hook, of the scullion's sleepy smile when you press a crust into his hand at dawn. Small things, each alone. Together, they are the hearth's quiet armor. You draw the last breath of night into your lungs, heavy with the scent of banked coals, ash, and bread yet unbaked. You close your eyes for a moment and see, not the stone and smoke but the fields waking under springer's soft hands, the trees bending with summer's sweetness, the barrels stacked neat and full when autumn slips its cool fingers through the courtyard gate. You see winter pressing at the walls, its teeth dulled by your careful watch. Your quiet ledger kept not with ink but with touch and taste and the hush of your own patient knowing. In the hush behind your eyes, the castle breathes, each stone, each beam, each shadowed stair. It breathes through the gossip that drifts down the corridor, through the steward's careful quill scratching out a tally you already carry in your bones. It breathes through the scullions' soft laughter when they find an unexpected apple tucked into the pot, through the spit boy's grin when the roast comes down, just as the Lord lifts his cup in praise. It breathes because you stand here, steady as a banked flame. Not noble, not fully servant, yet something of both, a hidden thread weaving the warm hall above to the quiet stone below. Your name may never echo in the tapestries or be sung by the minstrels who strum their lutes in the feast glow, but your hush holds their song all the same. Soon the first crows will stir on the battlements, their wings brushing frost from the weathered stones. The spit boy will wake, rubbing sleep from his eyes, ready to shoulder the handle once more. The scullions will drag cold buckets from the well, squealing at the shock of water on raw hands. The steward's boots will tap their steady beat across the flags, and the pages will bring new whispers of what the Lord desires at table. But for now there is only the hush, the warmth you've tended, the small, soft promise that when the wind howls at the arrow slits, it finds no welcome in the stores you guard. When hunger presses its palm to the gate, it finds your quiet hands already shaping tomorrow's loaf. In this hush, you rest. You know the hearth will catch when you lean close with your breath. You know the stores will hold because your careful watch holds them steady. You know the castle will sleep because you have taught it how to breathe. Slow, patient, warm. So let this hush slip around you now. Let the hearth's last glow guide you into dreams of orchard and field, smokehouse and cellar, bread rising under linen, embers glowing under ash. Let the castle's breath lull you, stone by stone, into the gentle trust that tomorrow's flame will come. And when you wake, the hush will be waiting, yours to hold once more. Sleep now. The castle sleeps with you. Conclusion. The hearth that now in this hush that settles after the stories of feasts and stores after the soft scurry of mice and the tap of boots on flagstones. Imagine yourself standing once more by the castle's hearth. A small flame flickering low, embers pulsing like the heartbeat of something ancient and steady. The castle above lies quiet now. The high table sleeps, the banners hang limp in the still air. The steward's ledger is closed, ink drying in the chill of the great hall. The pages and the maids curl on straw pallets behind doors that creak softly when the wind sighs through the towers. But here, where the warmth lives, the hush holds you gently. You stand as the cook has always stood. Hands rough, but sure, mind tallying each crumb and cask, even as your eyes grow heavy. You know what waits in the pantry as shadows, the salted meat swinging gently on its hooks, the cheese wheels resting in their cloth wraps, the sacks of grain waiting for the next dawn's bread. You know what waits by the hearth, the stew pot's last swirl, the dough rising under a linen cloth, the fire banked so it might catch again tomorrow. You carry it all. The soft gossip that drifts down from the hall, the laughter that echoes and fades, the secrets pressed into the hush of the stores. You hold the memory of feasts that glowed bright for an evening, then vanished into crumbs swept up by the spit boy's careful broom. And you stand, always, on that quiet edge between want and plenty, labor and praise, the hush below and the glitter above. You know that the warmth you tend here does more than feed the stomach. It feeds the castle's beating heart. Each loaf you shape, each pot you stir, each ember you guard through the longest nights, is a promise that the walls will hold. The banners will fly, the tables will groan, under the weight of good bread, when the world beyond grows cold. So let your mind drift now, past the crackle of the hearth, past the soft shuffle of scullions half asleep, past the creep of the pantry door settling into its frame. Let it drift to the hush that wraps these old stones, the hush that holds every meal, every rumor, every stolen crust, every careful tally. Let it drift to the warmth that pulses in the banked coals, promising another dawn, another loaf, another stew. Breathe in the hush. Feel the steady heartbeat of the fire you've kept. Know that in this gentle rhythm, the castle sleeps soundly, fed and held by hands like yours. In this small, constant watchfulness, you find your rest, too. And when your eyes grow heavy, and the last ember fades behind its soft drift of ash, trust that tomorrow's flame will catch. The stores will hold, the hearth will glow. The cook will stand once more at the threshold, where warmth and want meet, tending the hush that keeps the world whole. One quiet meal at a time. Sleep now. The castle sleeps with you.